One day I woke up in a frozen wasteland where monsters ruled everything. A white serpent that could devour glaciers whole, a gray bear could make the earth quake just by moving, and a vile rat could poison entire seas. And even with monsters like that roaming around, an emperor who once came back alive from that icy hell said the real terror of the white wasteland wasn't the beasts at all. It was the barbarians living deep inside it. And honestly, I understood why almost immediately. A barbarian woman casually crushed a giant bug under her foot and set off an explosion. Nearby, a barbarian man grabbed another bug with both hands and ripped it apart like it was paper. Then I walked forward and the rest of the bugs scattered the moment they saw me. It didn't matter. They were shredded apart without any resistance as I moved through them. After that, I looked at the idiot who'd torn one apart and told him only a barbarian would wear ignorance like a badge of honor. Then I asked how much longer I was supposed to put up with being surrounded by fools like this. The woman just blinked and asked what ignorant meant and whether it was something you could eat. At that point, I just sighed and said it wasn't even worth explaining. Then those lunatics started roasting the bugs we'd just killed. And I had to remind them that I specifically told them not to eat those because they were lethal. That was when it hit me. In less than a week, they had already eaten the entire stock. The woman actually tried to defend it by saying it was the noblest of challenges. I stared at her and asked why she sounded proud of something that reckless. Right then, the bald man started foaming at the mouth. His name was Greta. Woman panicked the second he collapsed and shouted at him to get himself together. And when that didn't work, she started slapping him over and over like that would magically fix poison. I just turned away and looked out at the snow because this was not what I wanted at all. I came to this world looking for fantasy, real fantasy. Back in my old life, I quit my job and went searching for wonder. I climbed the tallest mountain on Earth, reached the planet's core, and even traveled to the southernmost edge of the world. I kept chasing something impossible, hoping reality would finally crack open and reveal magic, mystery, anything, but nothing changed. There was no magic, no revelation, no hidden wonder anywhere. The world stayed painfully empty of fantasy, so every single night I wished that when I woke up it would all be different. I wished I'd opened my eyes inside a dream, and one day that prayer was finally answered. Far away from Kettle and the barbarian lands, a carriage was slowly forcing its way through the snow. One of the men escorting it grumbled about the cold, and his boss told him to shut up and bundle up unless he wanted to freeze to death. The mercenaries kept complaining that no reward was worth this madness, and one of them muttered that only a lunatic would ever cross the white wasteland. Their captain silenced them and reminded them that they had all agreed to the job. Men immediately shot back that none of them had imagined it would be this bad. Inside the wagon, a butler clicked his tongue, cleared his throat, and asked the woman inside if she was all right. She answered with a calm smile and said she was fine. This woman was Milena of the Akasha family. Outside, the mercenaries kept griping about the cold until the butler snapped at them for their rudeness. Milena told him not to be so harsh. She reminded him that these men had willingly chosen to escort them through the wasteland, and she even suggested bringing them inside because they looked like they were moments away from freezing solid. The butler refused immediately, saying she already knew what kind of things lurked in these frozen lands. Milena nodded and brought up an old story. Long ago, an emperor had tried to conquer the entire world, including the White Wasteland. He had led countless soldiers into the snow and even entered it himself. Years later, his empire collapsed and the emperor returned alone. He came back aged beyond recognition, broken in spirit, and sounding like a madman. He warned the world about terrible monsters, but he said the real danger wasn't the beasts. It was the barbarians who thrived freely in that endless white void. The butler dismissed it as a legend. But Milena pointed out that many of the monsters the emperor described were later proven to exist. That meant his words carried truth. The butler laughed and said that even so, nobody had ever actually seen a barbarian. Milena agreed. For all the stories about them, there were no real sightings. That changed seconds later. The captain suddenly halted the group and said there was something ahead. One of the mercenaries asked what he could see. And the entire group strained their eyes through the storm, but all they could make out was a shadow moving through the snow. The captain stared harder, then said he had good news and bad news. When they demanded the answer, he said the good news was that the figure was small. The bad news was that it was coming straight toward them. Everyone tensed immediately. The captain reached for his sword in a panic. Then the figure drew closer and they realized it was human. White hair, bare skin. Minimal clothing in a land cold enough to kill armed men wrapped in layers. And in that instant, the truth hit all of them at once. It was a barbarian. The white-haired man looked at them and casually said he was bored of seeing only barbarians, so he'd gone out for a stroll, and finding outsiders out here was lucky. He even smiled and admitted he hadn't expected to run into anyone. Then he introduced himself. His name was Kettle, an ashen barbarian. He looked over the group and asked if they were merchants. When they answered yes, he assumed the others were hired guards. The captain confirmed it, and Kettle immediately suggested they turn back, though he clearly doubted they would listen. The captain stiffened at that, and Kettle quickly realized there was someone important inside the carriage. Milena, sitting nervously inside, could feel the whole atmosphere change. Then Kettle said something no one expected. He casually offered his services to the group. The mercenaries were stunned. Kettle asked if he had spoken unclearly, then calmly explained that he was offering to guide them across the wasteland. The captain could barely believe what he was hearing. A barbarian from legend wanted to become a mercenary. He stammered out a question, asking if that was really all Kettle wanted and whether he truly meant them no harm. Kettle answered without hesitation if he had meant them harm. It would already be corpses. That answer was enough to send the captain straight to the carriage window. He knocked and asked Milena if she had heard what the barbarian said. She answered that she had. The butler immediately demanded to know what was happening, and the captain explained that the barbarian wanted to join them. Then he asked Milena what she wanted to do. She thought carefully and asked a very simple question: if they fought him, could they win? Captain answered honestly that he would not recommend trying. He could already tell Kettle was a monster in human form. Milena hesitated, but only for a moment. In the end, she said they would accept his offer. The captain relayed the answer, and Kettle lit up at once, calling it great news. The mercenaries still watched him like prey watching a predator as he started walking toward the carriage. The captain immediately asked what he thought he was doing. And Kettle told him to relax because he only wanted to speak directly to the person in charge. The captain warned him that if he tried anything, he would regret it. Kettle answered that he already knew and kept walking anyway. One mercenary whispered whether it was really okay to let him get close to her. Another suggested they stop him. The captain scoffed and asked exactly how they planned to do that. Near the carriage, the butler was nearly panicking. Demanding to know what Milena had just done, Milena told him to stay calm. Then Kettle reached the carriage, knocked politely, and asked if he might enter. The butler looked like he was on the verge of collapsing. Milena swallowed hard, gathered herself, and told him to come in. Kettle grinned. Inside the carriage, the butler sits awkwardly, cramped and stiff, while Kettle looks completely at ease. Kettle tells the butler to calm down, assuring him that he has no intention of causing any harm. The butler, visibly trembling, insists that Kettle must be lying. Meanwhile, Milena cannot hide her amazement. Seeing a barbarian from legend up close has completely captivated her. She says that it is a pleasure to meet him. Kettle replies that the pleasure is his, then remarks on the unexpected warmth inside the carriage. He notes that even with insulation, maintaining this kind of temperature in such brutal snow must be difficult. She explains that it is all thanks to magic. Kettle says he is genuinely excited to witness magic firsthand, especially in a world like this. She does not fully understand what he means, so he elaborates. He explains that the White Wasteland is an extremely dangerous place, and with only those mercenaries, their chances of surviving this journey are next to none. That is why he intends to protect their lives. But then he adds that he has one condition. Both of them grow uneasy. And Milena asks what it is he wants. Kettle answers that all he seeks is knowledge of the world beyond the snowfields. He says that the information they possess is the only thing he desires. She is surprised by how simple the request is. Kettle points out that it is a fair trade and she has to agree. Milena is not even sure whether she truly has a choice, but she says that she understands. Kettle nods in approval and asks for her name. She gives it, formally introducing herself with her full title. Kettle introduces himself in return and says that he looks forward to working with her. He then shares that he always dreamed of living in a fantasy world. One day when he opened his eyes, he found himself in this place, reborn as a barbarian in an endless snowfield. There was no time to question anything. The only reality before him was the biting cold and the monstrous beasts that roamed it. To survive, he says he took control of a barbarian tribe, hunting and leading through sheer desperation. He no longer remembers how many years have passed. All he knows is that he has spent countless days trying to escape this wasteland. But every time he reached the edge, he ran into a magical barrier. His quest remains unfinished, and until it is completed, he cannot leave the snowfield. He continues to explain that he was on the verge of giving up when, for reasons he still does not understand, people from outside began appearing from time to time. That is when the truth finally dawned on him. The world beyond the snowfield is the fantasy world he had always longed for, the dream world he wanted to reach. From that moment on, he stopped merely surviving and began actively searching for a way out. He pursued that quest with relentless determination. During Quest 295, for example, he was ordered to kill a giant lizard. He crushed monsters beneath his feet and completed every objective placed before him, never once wavering from his goal. Trapped in this frozen prison, every scrap of information brought by outsiders became priceless to him. But he says that most of the humans he has encountered either panicked and attacked on sight or had already gone mad, just like the Emperor. This time, however, he feels that a real conversation may finally be possible. He admits that he cannot even remember the last time he had someone intelligent to speak with, after being surrounded for so long by ignorant barbarians. Then, after hearing the sounds coming from outside, he comments that it seems she is transporting weapons. Milena is caught off guard and asks how he figured that out. Kettle explains that he can hear the sharp clinking of steel from the wagons, and that there is no way he would fail to recognize that sound. He then asks if there is a war going on. She confirms that there is. The Empire and the Kingdom are at war. Looks like the outside world is not peaceful either. Milena continues to explain that while the Empire has the upper hand in both numbers and supplies, the Kingdom is still holding strong thanks to the hero and the sword master guarding its borders. Kettle reacts with clear interest, surprised that both a hero and a sword master actually exist. He asks what kind of powers they wield. She asks if he is unfamiliar with mysteries. Kettle admits that he has never once left the snowfields. She says she does not know the exact details, but she shares what she has been told. There is a force known as mystery, and only a small number of individuals can perceive it or use it. Those people are ranked according to their strength. The lowest is third rate, those who can merely sense the power. Second rate refers to those who can actively use it. First rate are those who can manifest it into reality. Mystery, she explains, is similar to mana or aura. Usually knights, mages, and spirit summoners fall somewhere within those ranks, but beyond that point the hierarchy loses all meaning. Some beings have already surpassed every limit. The transcendent are those who can completely dominate mystery with power great enough to split the heavens. The sword master is said to be one of them. The hero, however, exists on an entirely different level, someone who not only controls mystery, but alters the world itself through sheer presence. She adds that simply having one's power ranked and named is already proof of greatness. Even being classified as third-rate is considered a mark of tremendous strength. Hearing that, Kettle says he wants to meet them. She looks stunned and asks if he really means that. Kettle says he cannot even remember how long he has been trapped here. For all this time, his only concern had been survival, but now he sees it clearly. This snowfield is part of a fantasy world, and he has to see the rest of it. He smiles and says that it is no longer just a wish, it is a necessity. Milena asks if he truly is a barbarian. Kettle says that would not be entirely wrong, and judging by their reactions, it seems they are quite familiar with his kind. She confirms that there are many legends about barbarians. Kettle looks puzzled and asks what sort of legends she means. She finds it strange that he does not know, considering he has never once been outside. She then recounts the story of the Emperor, and Kettle says he remembers that man and had dismissed him as insane. When she asks what he means by that, Kettle quickly brushes it off and says it is nothing. Still, he acknowledges that her legends are probably accurate since he has met people like that before. He then shifts the conversation and comments on the number of wagons, noting that she seems to be transporting a large stockpile of weapons. He asks why she is crossing the snowfield. She hesitates for a moment. Shen admits that they are in a desperate situation and that she needs a great deal of money. When he asks why, she explains that her family has been involved in commerce for generations. Over time, they built up a great fortune, but jealous rivals sabotaged them and drove them deep into debt. Basically, this is the mission to save her family. Kettle replies that in that case, she must be trying to sell weapons to the kingdom. She asks how he figured that out, and he reminds her that she already told him the empire has no supply problems. If that is true, then the weapons can only be intended for the struggling kingdom. He adds that even though he does not know much about the values of the outside world, transporting this many weapons must be worth a fortune, enough to justify the danger of crossing the wasteland. He then guesses that the only reason they would choose the snow-filled route is because the kingdom's territory borders the empire. She looks genuinely amazed by how quickly he managed to piece all of that together. Then she adds that, according to legend, barbarians are supposed to be ignorant savages, and now she cannot help but wonder who Kettle really is. Just then, the carriage comes to an abrupt stop, startling her. The butler also asks what is happening. A sharp, piercing screech echoes from outside. Kettle listens for a moment, then comments that it sounds like they have some unwanted company. Beyond the carriage walls, a massive creature appears. Its body looks like it is melting as it drags itself forward. The captain immediately starts panicking. Milena recognizes it at once and says that it is a black slime. Kettle repeats the name and asks if that is what it is called. She says yes and explains that it is a monster thoroughly documented in old records. He asks what records she means, and she explains that many powerful warriors once tried to conquer the White Wasteland. Most of them died, but the few who survived wrote books describing everything they had seen. Out of all the monsters recorded in those accounts, the black slime appears more often than any other. She then asks if Kettle knows about them too. He casually replies, of course he does. They are chewy and taste pretty good. He even calls them his snack of choice. Milena recoils in disgust and asks if he is serious. Kettle tells her that if she is curious, she should catch one and try it herself. She quickly refuses. Then the carriage shakes violently as the black slime charges at them with a piercing screech. The captain shouts in panic, and Milena begs Kettle to do something. But Kettle does not move. She demands to know why he is just sitting there, and Kettle calmly reminds her that he made a contract with her. He promised to protect their lives, and he will act only when there is actual danger. She asks what he means by that, and he answers that the mercenaries are more than capable of handling this one. Outside, the black slime surges forward, and the captain barks at his men to raise their shields. They obey, but the impact nearly crushes their defense. The force throws the captain backward and sends him crashing into the snow. Another mercenary rushes in with an axe raised high, screaming as he attacks, but the creature smacks him aside like a ragdoll and hurls him into the side of a carriage. Dazed, the man drops his weapon and yells in confusion, asking what the hell is going on. The slime then turns toward the captain. He shouts a warning to his troops, explaining that the monster can only move in straight lines, and orders them to scatter and attack in coordination. The mercenaries acknowledge him at once and start repositioning. One of them lunges in from the side and manages to slice into its face, making it shriek as it spits out a burst of purple goo. Another mercenary raises his spear and hurls it straight into the slime's head. It pierces through, and for the first time the group sees a visible result. Encouraged, the captain yells for them to keep going. He charges in himself, his sword glowing with green aura, and slashes deep into the creature's body. He tells them that ordinary attacks are useless. They have to destroy the core hidden inside it. With that, the mercenaries press in together. The captain leaps up and drives his blade straight down, shattering the core at last. The black slime collapses on the spot. For a moment, the mercenaries just stand there frozen. Then they erupt into triumphant cheers, shouting in disbelief that they actually won. Milena is relieved, marveling out loud that they really managed to defeat it. Kettle, however, looks completely unimpressed. If anything, he seems more annoyed than amazed. The group continues onward until they are forced to stop yet again. This time, a giant wolf blocks their path. The mercenaries attack without hesitation, aiming for its throat. With well-coordinated strikes, they tear open deep wounds across its neck, until the beast finally bleeds out and collapses into the snow. One mercenary remarks that the snowfield is not nearly as terrifying as people claimed, saying that the stories must have been exaggerated. But the captain immediately warns them not to let their guard down. They are only halfway through. Another mercenary begins to question Kettle's strength, pointing out that the Barbarian has not done anything impressive so far. He suggests that the stories about Kettle, just like the stories about the Wasteland, may have been blown out of proportion. In his eyes, Kettle might be nothing more than a leech coasting on their effort. He says that, at the very least, they should test what Kettle is capable of. A knock then comes from the carriage. Milena asks what it is, while Kettle glances outside without saying a word. One of the mercenaries steps forward and says he needs to speak with her. He explains that since they have a contract with her, it is their responsibility to ensure her safety. Milena thanks them, saying she is grateful they accepted this job when everyone else turned it down. The mercenary nods, but says there is one thing they can no longer overlook. Kettle has not lifted a finger in any of the fights so far. Milena tries to explain, but he bluntly asks whether they are allowed to test if Kettle really deserves the special treatment he has been receiving. She turns toward the captain, and he admits that he tried to stop them, but they refused to listen. Kettle grins and says that if they really want to test him, he does not mind. But then he adds that now is not the time. They ask what he means, and Kettle says they have guests arriving. The mercenaries scoff and demand to know what nonsense he is talking about. Then a guttural, mocking voice echoes through the air. A monster hisses that the fragile mortals have arrived and that today will be a feast. It says it will savor their fear and tells them to struggle, because their panic will be the seasoning. Milena screamed and clutched her ears. The winds grew sharper, colder, howling around them. The mercenaries tensed, and Kettle stood calmly. He stated that this was enough. The people with him were his guests. He told the snake to turn back. The serpent questioned his presence, accusing him of forgetting his place and straying too far from his tribe's territory. Kettle cut him off, saying it was none of his concern. The snake began to stir the wind into a cyclone, declaring its identity and threatening to show Kettle what true power looked like. But Kettle replied that it was time the snake learned some respect. He pulled his fist back and drove it straight into the serpent's gut. A shockwave ripped through the air, snow exploded in all directions, the serpent recoiled in agony. A massive blue burst followed, the ground trembling from the force. The mercenaries could barely stay on their feet under the pressure. A second shockwave erupted, this one even stronger. Milena and the butler braced themselves, nearly swept away. The serpent lay groaning in the snow. Kettle remarked that this was the kind of creature that only learned after a beating. Milena called out his name and he answered that he was finishing up here. He promised it wouldn't take long. With a stomp, he launched forward again like a supersonic missile in the air. The serpent, not yet dead, reared up, only to be met with another devastating punch that triggered another violent explosion. Sometime later, the mercenaries bowed their heads, trembling. They admitted they had sinned and begged for mercy. Kettle responded calmly, saying that he understood. It was only natural not to trust a stranger so easily. As they resumed their journey, the butler looked half frozen, shivering violently. Kettle glanced at him, then turned to Milena, and said that something about her puzzled him. He explained that from her manner of dress and her speech, she didn't seem like a simple agent of her family. He asked why she was risking her life on such a dangerous expedition. She admitted that he was sharp, then revealed her full identity. She said she was the first daughter of Lady Belyaka, concubine to Lord Kasakakasha. Kettle asked if that made her mother the second wife. She confirmed it, explaining that her mother was brought in through a political marriage only to be discarded. She described her mother as pitiful, powerless, and treated as little more than a servant within the family. She and her mother existed in name only within House Akasha. Realizing she was speaking too freely, she said aloud that Kettle's silence had drawn her into over-explaining. She then stated that she had volunteered for this trade mission herself. Even if the journey was deadly, someone had to take the lead, so she stepped forward. Kettle told her that she was smart. He said she had strong ambition and that greed in the right hands was a virtue. She looked at him, caught off guard, about to respond, when they were interrupted by shouting outside. They both turned as Milena's eyes widened. The captain shouted that they had made it. Before them, grass poked through the snow. They had crossed the white wasteland. Milena and her team are offering heartfelt thanks to Kettle. He asked them how they planned to handle the return journey. Milena replied that by then she could travel through the Empire without issue. Kettle nodded, saying that made sense. Once she'd sold the weapons and returned empty-handed, crossing borders would be no problem. Milena then asked him about something he'd said earlier about her being intelligent and ambitious. She wanted to know what exactly he meant by that. Kettle said he meant exactly what it sounded like. He explained that while she was clearly intelligent, her ambition stood out even more. Her family, once powerful, was now on the verge of collapse due to financial ruin. And even though she was only a concubine's daughter, the fact that she herself chose to act while others stood frozen in crisis would not go unnoticed. He concluded that in times of downfall, people would naturally rally behind the one brave enough to lead. Her intent is clear. She wants to take control of her family. She asks Kettle if he disagrees with her assumption. Kettle responds that it's a perfect answer. She admits that he's not wrong at all. Kettle then says that it all makes sense. A child born of a concubine stepping into danger to reclaim the family name is a tale as old as the concept of ambition itself. She reflects on Kettle's intellect, thinking to herself that he isn't like the arrogant fools who think themselves clever, like those who have Ayanokoji's picture on their TikTok profile. Anyways, she wonders if he were hers, everything would be different. She asks if he's ever thought about leaving the snowfields and whether he'd consider joining her. He declines for now, saying that he still has unfinished business in the snowfields. She looks disheartened, but quickly recovers, realizing it might not be the end. She reaches into her belongings, pulls out a pendant, and offers it to him. She asks if he'll accept it, and if he ever visits the outside world and seeks out her family to show them this as proof. He tells her that if it's a gift, he'll gladly accept it. She thanks him and says she hopes they'll meet again someday. Kettle echoes the sentiment. Their carriage drives off into the woods, disappearing between the trees. 5 years pass, at last all conditions are met. Kettle has completed 784 quests, and the time has come. He is finally allowed to leave the snowfields. His face lights up with genuine excitement as he looks forward to a new journey ahead. He takes a deep breath and begins to savor the air. He says aloud that it's everything he missed. The scent of grass, the sound of water flowing, sensations utterly absent in the frozen wasteland. He turns back to the vast white plains and yells into the wind that he hopes he never has to return. He says that this strange magical world was the one he had dreamed of even in sleep. It is a land of illusions, of mystery, of wonder, a world he thought he'd never reach. Though his origin had gone horribly wrong, he had survived against the odds. And now he could finally embrace the world of swords, magic, dragons, elves, true fantasy. Without that yearning, he says he would have died long ago. Surviving the snowfields required more than a will to live. It demanded obsession. As he walks, he notices glowing lights in the distance, and assumes it must be a village. He becomes giddy at the thought of meeting actual civilized people. He remembers trying to talk to the barbarians who lived in snow holes, attempting to discuss concepts like shelter, only to be met with blank, clueless stares. He reflects on how much he misses human villages and wonders what to say upon arrival. He debates whether to greet them with a simple hello or dive straight into a question about the world. Whatever he decides, he's determined to be gentlemanly. As he gets closer, he notices the trees. They're unlike any he's seen, distinct in structure, glowing faintly. Deep within the forest, an elf stretches out his hand and announces that this will be their new home. The other elves break into smiles and excitement, unloading their supplies. One of the younger elves, however, raises a concern. The elder asks what's troubling him. The younger elf says he's unsure whether the area is truly safe. The elder says that it is, assuring everyone that this location is extremely remote and humans cannot reach it. The younger elf says he knows that, but points out that the snowy plains are nearby. The elder waves off the concern. He says that for thousands of years, nothing has ever emerged from the snowfields. Besides, they've set up a powerful barrier, one designed to hide their presence and make the forest seem completely mundane. He explains that the barrier took months to craft, built with ancient elven magic. As long as it stands, no one will find them. Even if a monster from the snowfields did get close, it would pose no real threat. Meanwhile, as Kettle walks, he unknowingly places a hand through the edge of the barrier. It tears under his touch like cloth. He pauses, noting the strange sensation and wondering what he just tore through. He looks around, trying to figure out how much farther he needs to go. That's when he spots her, a little elf girl clearly lost and wandering alone in the forest. Kettle gasps, shocked that he's already encountered an elf, a real one. He says that this must be fate. Elves are a hallmark of any true fantasy world, and meeting one so early must be a sign of good things to come. But the girl looks frightened. She doesn't recognize the forest anymore. She's wandered too far. Then she notices a shadow looming above her. Her eyes widen in terror. As Kettle leans down and greets her with what he believes is a polite hello. Yes, a very polite one. She freezes, then begins to faint. But as a gentleman, our boy Kettle quickly catches her before she hits the ground and wonders what's wrong. He laments that he didn't even get a proper conversation in and already she's collapsed. Given the situation, he decides he'll return her to her village. He remembers that elves are often portrayed as beings of peace, aligned with order and goodness. If he returns their lost child, perhaps they'll welcome him. He smiles at the thought, lifting the girl into his arms as he starts walking toward the direction she came from. Meanwhile, panic has broken out in the village. They demand to know how a human breached the barrier. Kettle arrives at the edge of the settlement carrying the child. The situation escalates instantly. Her mother sobs with relief, but the others are in disbelief. The elder shouts in horror, asking how a human could possibly be here. He reiterates that the barrier should have stopped any outsider. The scouts inform him that there's a crack in the magical barrier. The elder demands to know where the queen is. Someone replies that she's away on patrol. Kettle tries to speak, saying he means no harm, but the elves warn him that unless he returns the child immediately, they'll hunt him down. The elder mutters that the humans must have come prepared. No simple trick could break their barrier. He wonders how long their presence has been known and who might be tracking them. Kettle wonders aloud whether he's just been labeled an intruder, and says that he needs to fix this misunderstanding. The girl opens her eyes, surprised, and sees that Kettle is gently lowering her to the ground. He tells her to go back to her people. She looks up at him and immediately screams. His face, rugged and unfamiliar, strikes terror into her. She bursts into tears and runs into her mother's arms. Kettle stands there bewildered, wondering aloud if his face really is that frightening. He says that he always thought it was decent. Then he declares that he has returned the child and repeats that he is not their enemy. The elder yells that the hostage has been recovered and orders everyone to attack. Dozens of elves draw their bows and fire. magical arrows streak through the air. Kettle asks if they're deaf. He shakes his head and says that elves are far more savage than he imagined. He always thought elves were peaceful nature lovers, beings of harmony and grace. But these elves are wild. He says that it actually makes sense. Living in the wilderness means embracing the law of survival, and survival is anything but peaceful. Nature favors the strong. Of course, they're like this. Our boy turned into Socrates for a moment as the arrows continued to bounce harmlessly off his body. More archers fire again. They begin speculating that he must be wearing some powerful artifact to block their attacks, but even artifacts must have a limit. They say they'll keep firing until it fails. Kettle raises both hands in the air and tells them to calm down. Then with a single motion, he claps. The resulting shockwave rips through the forest, a thunderous burst that shatters the silence like an explosion of raw power. The elves are nearly blown off their feet, stumbling back as they shout that the barrier needs to be deployed. But it's already too late. The shockwave that erupts from Kettle's clap launches them into the air like leaves in a hurricane. Not only does it tear through their ranks, but it also shatters the barrier meant to keep their sanctuary hidden, sending cracks of magical energy rippling through the entire forest. The elder starts trembling, demanding to know what in the world just happened. Kettle, realizing the chaos he's caused, calls out to the elves, warning them again that he isn't their enemy. Then it dawns on him he forgot to restrain his strength again, as he raises his voice to calm them. A fire arrow shaped like a bird arcs toward him from above. He looks up, watching as it soars, then detonates in a thunderous explosion. The smoke parts to reveal a woman standing on a rocky outcrop. Her presence stills the air. The elder and the others go silent, stunned as she appears. This is their queen, the legendary hero of Epai and the ruler of the Leaf clan, Marcelia Hussein Kuja. Looking down at Kettle, Marcelia demands to know what's happening. The elder quickly tells her that a human attacked them. Marcelia narrows her eyes and says that if this is true, then even this secluded haven is no longer safe. Kettle brushes smoke from his face and speaks to her, asking for a moment to explain. He says he'd appreciate it if she would just listen to his words. Marcelia, stunned by the fact that he's unharmed, stares at him. The elder mutters in disbelief, wondering how he's still standing after taking a direct strike from her. Marcelia glares at Kettle with growing disgust, asking aloud why someone as powerful as him would target them. She then declares with venom that she despises humans. She draws back her bow with precision and fury, announcing her name and her title as Queen of the Leaf clan. She says he will pay the price for his greed in seeking them out. Kettle begins to wonder aloud if they're not hearing him or if the language is different, though it clearly isn't. He considers whether they're simply ignoring him or if the relationship between elves and humans is just this broken. He shrugs, saying there's not much choice left. The one thing he'd learned in the snow plains, after all, was that people only start listening. Once you beat them up, Marcelia starts merging elements into her attack. When it's ready, she releases it, a massive wave of water, surging through the air with violent speed. Kettle steps into it without hesitation, rears his fist back, and smashes straight through the spell. His counterstrike follows the trajectory of the attack in reverse, exploding upward toward Marcelia. Kettle curses himself under his breath, realizing once again he forgot to pull his punch. All that's heard next is her scream as the blast lands. She's now collapsed on the ground, breathless. Kettle looks on, wincing, wondering if he's made everything even worse. Marcelia trembles as she speaks, saying that from that single clash she could tell he wasn't just strong. He was far beyond the level of a transcendent. She asks aloud why someone of that magnitude would come here of all places. Then she yells to her people, ordering them to run immediately. The villagers call out her name, panicked, but she repeats her command, telling them all to flee. Now, as the elves begin their retreat, she turns back to Kettle and says that although she acknowledges his strength, he will never succeed in whatever goal he has here. Kettle groans and says he just wanted to have a conversation. He can't believe things have spun this far out of control. Marcelia closes her eyes and begins chanting a mantra. A red aura builds in her palms, swirling violently. She opens them again, and above her floats a massive fireball, its center slowly forming into something solid. That something takes shape, a bull massive, powerful, with horns made of blazing fire. Its name is Piego. Kettle lights up like a child, marveling at what he's witnessing. He exclaims that this is the first real summon he's ever seen. The creatures of the snowfields, he says, were grotesque, barely resembling anything magical. But this is a proper summon. It breathes life into the fantasy he's always dreamed of. Marcelia commands the spirit to annihilate the enemy. Piego groans and complains, saying that contracts are always more trouble than they are worth. He adds that this is a huge hassle, especially since he's a high-grade fire spirit. Marcelia snaps at him to be quiet. She knows she can barely summon him, and the contract was only possible with the aid of another tribe. She never expected to use it under these circumstances, but tells him to fulfill his duty. Piego asks if the target is the human in front of them. As soon as it glances back, sweat begins to form. He seriously reconsiders his life's choice and asks if that thing is even a human. As Kettle stares at him with sparkling eyes full of wonder, still completely awestruck, he says that this is absolutely incredible. Marcelia repeats that the intruder must be destroyed. Piego lets out a sigh and declares that he has made his decision. He will reduce the human to ash and leave nothing behind. Kettle frowns and asks out loud what exactly he did to deserve this. Piego's flames flare to life as he prepares to charge. He scrapes his hooves across the ground, sending sparks scattering over the field. Then barrels straight toward Kettle with full force. A massive explosion erupts the instant they collide. Marcelia braces herself against the shockwave. But when the smoke clears, she sees something that should not be possible. Kettle is still standing there completely unfazed, his hands locked tightly around Piego's horns. Even Piego looks stunned. Kettle grins and says that this is a relief. Since it is a beastly form, that means he does not have to hold back. It will be much easier to beat him senseless. Marcelia's eyes widen in horror. As Kettle drives his fist into Piego's forehead, the ground beneath them shatters like glass, and the force does not stop with the spirit. It tears straight through him and devastates the landscape behind them. Like a cannonball of divine punishment, a shockwave bursts outward like a nuclear bomb. Marcelia screams, overwhelmed by the sheer power before her. She drops to her knees. She watches in disbelief as the fire spirit vanishes from existence. In a trembling voice, she whispers that this cannot be real. Kettle slowly steps toward her. She looks up at him and pleads for mercy. Not for herself, but for her people. Once again, he tells her that he is not her enemy. Marcelia blinks in confusion. For the first time, she hears his voice for what it truly is. Not a threat, but a plea, she asks what he means. After finally taking the time to talk, the two of them come to an understanding. Kettle explains everything and Marcelia listens carefully. At last, she realizes that he truly means them no harm. She bows her head and apologizes, admitting that she acted recklessly and judged him too quickly. They had mistaken him for a human who kidnapped their child, and now she understands that they committed a serious offense. Her conscience begins to weigh heavily on her. She admits that her judgment was rash. Kettle responds with calm reassurance, saying that it is all right. After all, they had made it clear that they were being hunted by humans, so he understands why they were so cautious. Still, he admits it is a little sad that no one gave him the chance to explain himself. She hesitates, then asks him directly whether he truly is not one of the humans chasing them. Kettle replies that this is his first time ever seeing an elf. He points out that there certainly are none in the White Wasteland. Realization spreads across her face as she asks whether he is one of the Ashen Barbarians. Kettle confirms that it is what outsiders call him. She says that should be impossible. No human is supposed to survive the White Wasteland. And if he came from there, then perhaps others could as well. Kettle says he is not so sure about that. He explains that the snowfield is bound by strict rules. Even powerful creatures like serpents are subject to them. For some unknown reason, he was able to bypass those restrictions under the conditions of a quest. But he believes that kind of exception is extraordinarily rare. She says that is a relief. Then she asks whether his summon, the fire spirit he defeated, is all right. After all, he split that bull in half, so she is not entirely sure. Kettle says he is not so sure either. She explains that spirits, as beings of nature, return to the spirit realm when they are forcibly unsummoned. There is no permanent harm. Straightening herself, she acknowledges that she has been rude. Then she asks whether there is anything he wants, saying that as a gesture of apology, she will do whatever lies within her power. Curious, Kettle asks about the spirit. He wonders whether only elves can form contracts with beings like that. She answers that while it is rare, there are some humans with a deep connection to nature who can form such pacts, but for most, it is impossible. There are some humans with a deep connection to nature who can form such pacts, but for most, it is impossible. He asks whether it is truly beyond reach. She thinks for a moment, then says that if he is truly serious, he should go to Elfo Sagrado. Kettle asks what that is, and she tells him that it is the sacred land where the god of the elves resides, a place revered by all elves. There, perhaps even he might be able to form a contract. He visibly lights up and asks whether a human like him could even enter such a place. She replies that under normal circumstances it would be forbidden, but with her introduction it might be possible. She offers to share the location with him, but warns that he must keep it to himself. She explains that Elfo Sagrado is a dream destination for every elf researcher. To the elves, it is sacred beyond measure. No elf would ever willingly risk letting its location be discovered. But she says she wants to believe in him, and as a token of that faith, she hands him a small item. He takes it and thanks her. She adds that if he does reach that place, their god may test him. Still, she believes he will pass. Then she formally introduces herself once more as the queen of the leaf tribe that turns brown in autumn, Marcelia Hassian Karuja, and asks for his name. Kettle simply says that he is just a barbarian, no titles, no grandeur. Some time later, Kettle is seen stomping across the ground as he races through the forest at full speed, heading toward the destination she gave him. Every stride sends booming shockwaves through the trees. In a nearby city, a guard suddenly perks up, alarmed by the thunderous sound rushing toward them. They are stationed at the border of Varkan territory within the kingdom of Jahan. The head guard shouts for everyone to prepare for combat. Whatever is coming, it is approaching fast. Then the booming stops. The sound of sprinting footsteps gives way to a slow, deliberate walk. Kettle steps out from the trees, and the head guard can only stare at him in stunned silence. Kettle greets them and asks if they are the guards. He smiles and says it is nice to meet them. But they do not respond right away. Instead, they just stare at him in disbelief. They notice his ash-gray hair and the large scar stretched across his chest. One of them whispers that he must be the Ashen Barbarian. As Kettle steps closer, the guards immediately shout for him to stop, warning that if he comes any nearer, they will attack. Kettle calmly raises his hands and tells them that he is not their enemy. They ask what he wants, And Kettle points forward, beyond the wall. When they ask if he intends to enter the territory, he replies that he simply wants to visit and if possible stay for a little while. He admits he is not sure how long. The scene then shifts to Kettle speaking directly with the captain. The captain asks for his name and Kettle gives it. Then the captain asks for identification or at least some kind of proof. Kettle says he has nothing like that, but after thinking for a moment, he remembers something. He takes out the pendant Milena gave him and asks whether it is enough to verify who he is. The captain examines it and asks what exactly it is. Kettle explains that it is the crest of House Akasha, gifted to him by someone from that bloodline. The captain nods and says that House Akasha is a merchant family from the Denayan kingdom. He confirms that they have risen in prominence over the past few years, especially after a new leader took control. Kettle asks if that means the pendant is enough to prove his identity. The captain replies that while it is not absolute proof, it appears legitimate and certainly helps his case. So he allows Kettle entry but under certain conditions. Kettle asks what those conditions are. The captain explains that several other individuals with uncertain backgrounds are also trying to enter the domain. In order to test whether they can be trusted, all of them are required to form a party and clear a nearby dungeon together. Kettle remarks that it is an easier condition than he expected, and he accepts without hesitation. But the captain adds one more requirement. They must report everything that happens inside the dungeon. Kettle immediately understands the logic behind it. By forcing individuals with questionable status to watch one another, the guards can more easily spot suspicious behavior. He says it is clever. The captain gives a faint smirk and asks once more if Kettle truly is a barbarian. Kettle confirms that he is. The captain always believed barbarians are mindless savages. The captain replies that Kettle is the first barbarian ever to enter their domain, then ends the discussion and orders them to move out. In a nearby staging area, an older man mutters that even if the law demands it, crawling through a dungeon alongside thieves is unbearable. He introduces himself as a paladin named Alessandro Tyrannus. Sitting beside him, a rogue named Cassin Hark mocks his attitude and accuses him of still being bitter after getting scammed by another thief. Alessandro flares up at once, draws his sword, and shouts back at him. Cassin mocks his title, saying that paladins are not supposed to dress like vagrants. Then he laughs at Alessandro's surname and calls it ridiculous. Alessandro responds by tightening his grip on his weapon. And before long, the situation escalates. Cassin coated his blade with poison. But immediately, a woman lets out a tired sigh and tells them to stop. Both men glance in her direction. As she mutters that she cannot believe she has to explore a dungeon with the two of them, she introduces herself as Hayes, a cleric of Kaloja. She explains that the minimum party size is 4 and the final member should be arriving soon. Even so, she admits she feels uneasy about the entire arrangement. Then the door opens. The guard captain steps in and announces that the last member has arrived. Cassin mutters that he hopes this one is not insane. The door creaks open a little wider and Kettle ducks as he steps through it. All of them freeze and stare at him in shock. Kettle smiles and asks if they are his new teammates. The others instinctively take a small step back, stunned by the sheer presence he gives off. Cassin mutters in disbelief, overwhelmed by Kettle's aura. Kettle introduces himself and asks them to do the same. Cassin says that he is a thief. Alessandro introduces himself as a paladin. Kettle asks about holy power, and Alessandro admits that he is a special case who cannot use it. Kettle simply nods. Then Hayes introduces herself as a cleric who serves Kaloja, the god of lies and deceit. Kettle asks if that background is really enough to make her identity uncertain. She says yes, her god is not respected, so suspicion naturally follows her wherever she goes. Not long after, the guard captain returns and asks if they are ready. Kettle nods with confidence while the others look much less certain. Soon after that, they arrive at the dungeon. Kettle looks genuinely excited. This is his first dungeon ever. The captain explains that it has 3 floors and is filled with undead. Their task is simple, they must clear it and return with proof. Kettle tells them it is time to begin. He asks Cassin what the plan is. Nervous, Cassin calls him sir, but Kettle immediately says there is no need for formality. They are teammates now. Cassin clears his throat and explains that he and Alessandro will take the front line. He will scout for traps while Hayes supports them from the rear. Kettle says the plan is simple enough and agrees at once. With that, they begin their descent. Inside the dungeon, the group moves cautiously, their eyes constantly sweeping the darkness. Everyone is tense. Hayes remarks that the darkness feels unsettling. Cassin agrees. So far, the dungeon is too quiet, too normal, suspiciously normal. Then Cassin suddenly stiffens. He raises a hand and tells the group to stop. He says there are monsters nearby. Kettle glances around and says he does not see anything. Cassin points to the ground where bone fragments lie scattered in a strange pattern. He explains that they are skeletons in a dormant state. If anyone gets too close, they will animate and attack. Cassin mutters that the guard captain probably knew this from the start. This dungeon was not just meant to verify their identities, it was also designed to quietly dispose of unwanted outsiders. As Kettle studies the scattered bones, he says he has never fought a skeleton before. Cassin warns him that they are no joke. Even when damaged, they keep moving. Their bones are unnaturally tough, giving them extremely high defense. He adds that this dungeon is far more dangerous than he first assumed. He tells Hayes to prepare her magic, orders Alessandro to ready his shield and warns Kettle to stay alert. Casson says that during the fight he will search for an opening. Then he explains that simply damaging a skeleton is not enough. The weak point is the neck, and that is where they need to aim. Even then, it usually takes several strikes to break through. Kettle nods and says Casson's leadership is impressive. He tells him that he understands the plan. Casson gives the signal. Kettle steps forward slow and steady. Just as one of the skeletons begins to glow with mana, the bones pull themselves upright. Kettle watches in surprise as the figure fully forms and fixes its gaze on the group. Alessandro tenses, Hayes begins chanting. Casson melts into the shadows ready to flank. The skeleton charges with its blade drawn. Kettle pulls back his arm and swings not with a fist but with an open hand. He slaps the skeleton so hard that it explodes into dust. He blinks, mildly disappointed, and wonders out loud if they are really that weak. The others are left completely speechless. Alessandro is stunned, Hayes looks disturbed, Casson stands frozen in disbelief. Kettle lets out a laugh and says that, just as Casson explained, once the head is gone, the skeleton stops moving. Casson stammers that this is not what he meant at all. He explains that skeleton bones are not ordinary bones. They are reinforced by dungeon mana, making them incredibly dense, durable, and notoriously difficult to break. Even expert swordsmen struggle to sever them in a single strike without using aura. Pulverizing one like that should have been impossible. Casson admits that he already knew Kettle was strong, but not this strong. He starts wondering whether Kettle is even human. The pile of dust in front of them leaves no room for doubt. Kettle destroyed the monster with effortless ease. Kettle turns back to them and calmly says they should keep moving. He tells them not to rush. The others hurry after him without a word, but they say nothing and simply stay close behind him, trying their best to hide their fear. Casson gives him a nervous salute. Hayes and Alessandro exchange uneasy glances, both thinking the same thing. They really do not want to die. As they continue deeper into the dungeon, Kettle suddenly stops. He has noticed something. Casson asks why, but then all of them see it. More skeletons are forming. Hayes shouts in alarm as the bones begin pulling themselves together. Casson and Alessandro ready themselves for battle, but Kettle raises a hand and asks them for a favor. They pause, confused. He says that he wants to fight them alone. There is something he wants to test. They agree, though none of them are entirely sure what he means. Hayes gives a small, hesitant nod. Kettle walks toward the rising skeletons and picks up a sword from one of the bone piles. The others watch him curiously. He examines the weapon and comments on how fascinating it is that these creatures can reassemble themselves. One of the skeletons lunges at him, bringing its sword down in a vicious strike. Kettle casually catches the blade between two fingers and snaps it in half. He asks the skeleton what exactly it plans to do now. The skeleton shifts, regrips the broken weapon, and launches itself from the wall for another attack. This time, the blade manages to slice a few strands of Kettle's hair. He does not even flinch. Instead, he grabs the skeleton by the wrist and crushes it into dust. The severed hand falls to the ground. The skeleton looks down at it in confusion, then lifts its gaze back to Kettle and kicks the broken sword into the air. With precise timing, it catches it in its left hand. Kettle's eyes light up. He says that it knows how to switch hands, and that is impressive. The skeleton charges again, now wielding the weapon in a reverse grip. Kettle catches his left wrist and rips the entire arm off. The creature stumbles, then quickly regains its footing and tries to stab him with the jagged stump of its wrist. Kettle catches that too and breaks it without effort, commenting that this one is surprisingly clever. Hayes watches in horror. To her, it does not even look like Kettle is fighting, it looks like he is toying with it. Casson and Alessandro realize the same thing. Kettle is not battling the skeleton, he is experimenting. Kettle smacks the skeleton around and poking it, until its skull finally drops off and hits the ground. He glares at it and says that now it cannot move anymore. Then he stomps it flat, laughing as he calls the whole experience amusing. After that, he turns back to the others and apologizes for keeping them waiting. Casson hurriedly tells him that it is no problem at all. Kettle thanks him. The next moment, he is already standing over another pile of dust, ready to move on. The others nod quickly and say they are ready too. Casson leads them toward a stairway and says that it goes down to the second floor. As they descend, he suggests that they take a short break. Kettle thinks about it for a moment, then agrees. Casson thanks him with a bow. They all sit down, but the atmosphere is tense and painfully awkward. Sitting cross-legged, Kettle says that he has a question about the dungeon. Hayes tells him to ask whatever he wants. Kettle says it is a little embarrassing to admit, but he does not really have a proper understanding of dungeons. Hayes smiles and says that the desire to learn is a noble thing. She adds that while she is no expert, she will help however she can. He then asks why the dungeon is located so close to their territory. Would that not make it dangerous? Hayes explains that dungeon monsters generally do not leave the boundaries of the dungeon, though there are rare exceptions. When that happens, they are dealt with before the situation can grow worse. Casson clears his throat and adds to her explanation, saying that dungeons are natural phenomena. They can appear in the form of caves, towers, or even ruins. He goes on to explain that most dungeons tend to manifest near populated areas. Kettle says that explains why this one is here. Hayes adds that when a dungeon appears, the local lord evaluates its danger level. If it is deemed necessary, mercenaries and adventurers are hired to clear it out. Kettle nods and says that makes sense. Then he asks if dungeons ever appear inside cities. Hayes says that they never do, they always manifest some distance away. He asks one more question, are there rewards for clearing them? Hayes answers yes. She explains that there is usually a boss at the end and defeating it often yields valuable treasure. For a dungeon with 3 floors like this one, the reward could be significant. Kettle laughs and remarks that it is just like a game. Hayes looks confused and asks what he means. But Kettle brushes it aside and says that he was only talking to himself. Then he asks one final question. Who creates the dungeons? Hayes looks puzzled. She says that no one creates them. They are simply natural phenomena, but Kettle disagrees. He says there are too many strange coincidences. Dungeons always appear near people, they are filled with monsters and treasure. It almost feels as though someone wants them to be explored. Hayes pauses, then admits that he has a point. She says she has never questioned it before, it was simply accepted as fact. Even Casson admits that he never thought about it either. To him, it was just the way the world worked. Casson assumed that barbarians are supposed to be savage and mindless. That is common knowledge, and yet Kettle does not fit that image at all. Kettle says that the world is full of mysteries and that is what makes it fun. Casson snaps out of his daze, and Kettle asks if everyone is rested. They all answer yes. Kettle stands up and says they should continue. They enter the 2nd floor, and almost immediately, Kettle notices something. A treasure chest is sitting out in the open. He points at it and asks what it is. Casson explains that it is most likely a dungeon reward, but opening it is another matter entirely. He says that to unlock a chest of that quality, they would need a master-level rogue with exceptional lockpicking skill. Unfortunately, a rogue of that caliber would never be found in a low-tier dungeon like this one, so they may have no choice but to leave it behind. Kettle glances at him and says that he would still like him to try unlocking it. Casson turns to him in disbelief and asks why he would even ask that, while making an expression like someone who got caught lying about their CV. Kettle points to the large, ornate chest and says that it is a treasure chest, and since Casson is a rogue, that naturally makes it his job to open it. Casson tries to say something, but Kettle does not give him the chance to finish. He says firmly that handling treasure is the rogue's domain, so he is simply asking him to do what is expected. Casson admits that technically that is true, but deep inside, panic begins to twist in his chest. If he really had the ability to open a high-grade chest, he would not be stuck as an unregistered bottom feeder scraping by on scraps. That's a good point. The truth is that he does not know how to pick locks at all. But when he sees the childlike excitement on Kettle's face, he cannot bring himself to confess it. In his mind, he imagines Kettle's disappointment slowly turning into disgust, followed immediately by one of those bone-pulverizing slaps that turn skeletons into dust. So, forcing out a laugh while his heart cries in despair, he says that he will give it a try. As he kneels in front of the chest, his thoughts become pure desperation. He tells himself that if he fails here, he may not make it out alive. Kettle watches closely, intrigued, and comments that the process looks fascinating. Casson desperately tries to remember anything useful from the times he worked as a porter for real thieves, but nothing comes to him. Under his breath, he whispers that this is life or death. His fingers fumbled over the lock until something suddenly clicked. His whole body trembled as he looked up in disbelief. It had opened. He nearly cried from relief and muttered to himself that maybe he really did like Kettle after all. Hayes stared in amazement, saying she had heard that only top-tier rogues could open chests like that. Kettle sincerely praised him, and Casson could only mumble that it hardly seemed possible himself. In that moment, something shifted inside him. For the first time in his life, he began to wonder whether he had ever truly failed to reach his potential, or if he had only ever been surviving. Kettle then asked how valuable the reward was. Hayes estimated that it was enough to support an ordinary family for a month, or even let them live in comfort for quite some time. Kettle laughed at that, then told Casson to take care of the loot. Casson agreed immediately, and picked the item from the chest with almost reverent care. Then Kettle called his name. Casson shrieked in shock and nearly dropped it on the spot. Kettle simply asked whether he needed help, flustered. Casson insisted that he was completely fine, even though no one could understand why he was acting so jumpy. Later, as they moved deeper into the dungeon, Casson was carrying what looked like a small mountain of loot on his back. Then Kettle suddenly told everyone to stop. Ahead of them were more skeletons, 4 of them. Kettle calmly said that he would take care of 3. That left 1 for the rest of the team. Casson immediately understood that this was not a gift. It was a test, a challenge. He said this was going to be a real fight. Alessandro and Hayes quickly prepared themselves. As Kettle walked forward, and the skeletons began to stir, Casson muttered that the way bones assembled themselves was always unsettling. The 4 enemies rose. Kettle reminded everyone to get ready. Hayes cast a glowing buff that wrapped the team in a golden aura. Then Kettle gave the signal to begin, and Casson moved first. He aimed for the neck and landed a clean strike, but it was not enough. The skeleton remained standing as the others began moving to surround him. Kettle immediately caught the other 3 and dragged them back, saying that he had already claimed those ones. He told the rest of the party not to interfere. This one was their fight. The skeleton brought its weapon down, and Alessandro blocked it with his shield, pinning the creature in place. Casson used that opening to leap off a nearby wall and strike from behind. Hayes followed with a disorienting spell, Shadow of Confusion, before bathing Alessandro in golden light. Strengthened by the blessing, Alessandro drove his sword toward the skeleton's neck. It cracked, but it still did not fall. The skeleton actually laughed. So did Kettle, who had already dealt with the other three by then. He stood there watching the last one stagger, and said that it was genuinely enjoyable to watch a team's dynamic in action. He crushed one of the fallen skulls in his palm, and remarked that now that the real threats were gone, he could finally enjoy the show. The trio realized they were being watched. At once, they threw themselves at the skeleton with everything they had. The creature looked around in confusion, almost terrified as all three of them attacked it like cornered beasts. They were convinced that if they showed even a hint of weakness, Kettle would finish them before the monster ever could. When the battle finally ended, all three of them collapsed to their knees in exhaustion. Kettle muttered that the group who came with Milena must have been genuinely strong. By the time they reached the third floor, even more skeletons appeared. But with Kettle leading the way, they pushed forward without much difficulty. Eventually, they arrived at the heart of the dungeon, a grand chamber where a skeletal figure sat upon a throne. It was a skeleton knight. Hayes could hardly believe her eyes. She explained that these monsters were elite skeletons armed with longswords and shields. Only fighters at the level of a knight or higher had any real chance of defeating one. For anyone else trying to fight it would be suicide. Kettle asked what would happen if they failed to defeat it and chose to retreat instead. Hayes answered that as long as they made a reasonable report, the territory would accept it. But Kettle only smiled and started walking forward. Hayes called out in confusion, but he replied that defeating the monster sounded like the more reasonable option. The skeleton knight stirred, and its aura radiated overwhelming power. Kettle remarked on how fascinating it was to see a skeleton that could maintain its complete form. Then it dropped into a low stance, clearly preparing a wide sweeping attack. Hayes shouted a warning, and immediately raised a barrier, but the force of the skeleton knight's strike was so immense that the barrier cracked on impact. Her magic shattered instantly. Alessandro threw himself forward to take the blow with his shield, but even that was barely enough. He collapsed to the ground, wheezing as he asked whether something that strong could even be fought at all. The skeleton knight then turned its focus to Kettle and charged forward with incredible speed. Kettle met it head-on and drove a single punch into its chest. The creature disintegrated in the middle of its charge. Its torso was obliterated, and the rest of its body crumbled into a heap of ash. The others could only sit there in silence, too stunned to say a word. Kettle dusted off his hands and asked if that was really all it had. Then he noticed another treasure chest. He called out to Casson. Casson asked what he wanted, and Kettle asked whether he could open it. Casson immediately said no, explaining that it had a high-level lock far beyond anything he could handle. Kettle simply replied that that was a shame, before Casson could even finish saying they would have no choice but to leave it behind. Kettle punched the chest. It actually shattered. At that point, no one even reacted anymore. Kettle casually said that the rewards were certainly easier to access this way, then told Casson to collect them. Casson numbly agreed, still trying to process how someone could casually break open a high-tier lock. And if Kettle could do that the whole time, then why had he made him unlock the other chest in the first place? As the group approached the exit, a bright light suddenly enveloped them. A deep rumble echoed from behind, and they turned to see the dungeon beginning to collapse. Casson explained that when a dungeon is perfectly cleared, it disappears, and apparently this one had no secret room hidden inside. Kettle asked if secret rooms really existed. Casson said they did, but they were rare. Kettle laughed and said that sounded fun. Still struggling to understand how Kettle's mind worked, Casson could only wonder what kind of lunatic would hear that and think it sounded enjoyable. Back at the city gate, the guard captain was stunned. He said there was no way they could have finished that quickly. Then he cleared his throat and asked how the dungeon had been. Kettle answered that it was satisfying. The captain nodded and began processing their entry. He asked whether there had been any issues. Hayes said that nothing major had happened. When the guard captain asked her directly about Kettle, she said he should be fine, though there was still some hesitation in her voice. The captain understood exactly what that meant. Clearing a dungeon was never just a matter of survival. It was also a test of character. Casson then said that Kettle did not seem like a bad person. The captain agreed, pointing out that even though Kettle possessed monstrous strength, he had never once put his party in danger. He was nothing like the usual image people had of barbarians. Kettle then praised Casson, saying that he handled the traps and even managed to open a chest. He complimented Alessandro for being dependable on the front line, and he credited Hayes' prayers for helping the group succeed. The guard captain was genuinely surprised. Forced parties usually ended with everyone blaming one another. He handed over the rewards. Normally, the guards would skim off a portion for themselves, but this time he did not dare. Kettle insisted that the loot be divided fairly. The others tried to refuse, but he would not listen. He said they were a team, and they had earned it together. Then he suggested that they celebrate with drinks at the pub. Everyone agrees on the surface, but deep down they just want to leave. As they walked away, Kettle was full of enthusiasm, while the others followed behind him looking visibly drained. The guard captain watched them go and muttered to himself that for a barbarian to one-shot a skeleton knight, he had to be stronger than a knight and clearly far from ordinary. He declared that this was the beginning of something serious. Then he turned to his subordinates, told them he needed to inform the lord, and left them in charge. Not long after, he arrived at the lord's estate and knocked on the door. Inside, Lord Luke Barkin called for him to enter. The guard captain stepped in and reported that a barbarian had entered the territory. Luke asked whether permission had been granted. The captain said yes, explaining that he had not sensed any immediate danger. Luke then asked what the issue was. The captain answered plainly that the man was too strong. Luke asked how strong. The captain replied that he had defeated a skeleton knight with a single strike. That left Luke stunned. The skeleton knight was far beyond the level of any ordinary fighter. Luke muttered that a barbarian with that kind of strength was bound to become a headache. He asked whether the man could truly be considered a first-rate warrior. The captain said the chances were high. He then instructed the captain to summon the barbarian at once. The captain hesitated and questioned whether that was really a wise decision. Luke replied that the mere presence of someone with such overwhelming power wandering freely through his territory was itself a source of instability. He said he would rest easier after seeing the man with his own eyes. The captain warned him once again, emphasizing how dangerous the barbarian might be. But Luke waved the concern away and said there was no need to worry. His knight was present. At that, the captain blinked in surprise. He had not even noticed the knight's presence until that moment. Luke turned to the man and asked what he thought of the barbarian. The knight answered with cold certainty. He said that while the man might possess some crude power, he was still only a barbarian, an ignorant brute with neither sophistication nor skill. Against swordsmanship inherited from a true master of the blade, such a man would fall easily. Luke nodded, then ordered the captain once more to bring the barbarian in. He intended to speak with him personally. Meanwhile, at the tavern, Kettle was devouring a mountain of food, chewing noisily without the slightest concern for manners. The table groaned beneath piles of empty mugs and half-finished plates. The others could only watch, all three of them visibly disturbed by how gleefully and messily he ate. Kettle slammed his ale down with gusto and declared that the food was incredible. He praised the atmosphere too, calling it calm, relaxed, and perfect. Then he reminded them that it was his treat and told them to eat as much as they liked. The others answered with stiff, awkward laughs. Kettle then turned to Alessandro and asked whether he really was a paladin. Alessandro confirmed it, and Kettle followed up by asking what kind of divine power he wielded, since he had not seen any miracles or holy spells during the dungeon raid. Alessandro sheepishly admitted that he was still in training and that his powers had not fully awakened yet. Kettle said that was unfortunate. He had been looking forward to seeing genuine holy power in action. Alessandro cleared his throat and looked away. Then Kettle turned to Hayes and asked about her god, wondering whether there was a nearby temple. Slightly tense, Hayes explained that her deity Kaloja, the god of lies and deceit, was unwelcome in most lands. No temple here would receive her. Merely speaking her god's name was enough to invite suspicion and scorn. After a short pause, she asked a bold question. Just how strong was Kettle? Krasen and Alessandro immediately showed interest as well. Kettle did not seem offended. Instead, he simply replied that he had only recently left his homeland and did not really understand how strong he was compared to others. Then he added that he was curious about how powerful the skeleton knight they had fought actually was. The others told him directly that defeating a skeleton knight required someone to be at least second-rate, if not first-rate, and destroying one in a single blow, the way Kettle had, placed him firmly in first-rate territory. Kettle blinked, surprised that strength on that level was only considered second-rate. Before anyone could explain further, a nervous waiter approached and said it was time to close. Kettle apologized and stood up. Then he asked the others whether they had any plans. All three of them, in perfect unison, said they were extremely busy and could not stay any longer. Kettle nodded and said that was a shame. He hoped they would meet again someday. None of them shared that hope. In fact, each of them silently vowed to never end up in the same room with him again if they could possibly avoid it. Later, Kettle checked into a modest inn and collapsed onto the bed with a satisfied sigh. It was the first time he had slept in a real bed since arriving in this world. The reward money from the dungeon had easily covered the cost, and compared to the brutal frozen plains he came from, this felt like pure luxury. He thought back to the day he first opened his eyes in the white wasteland. It had taken him a very long time to finally reach civilized land. Now, lying comfortably in a warm room, he began wondering what he should do next. He wanted to experience real adventure. He wanted to see the sacred land of the elves, visit the royal capital, maybe even climb the magic tower. All the legendary places one would expect in a proper fantasy world. The thought alone filled him with excitement. Morning sunlight poured in through the window. Kettle stirred, wiped the drool from his cheek, and sat up just as a knock sounded at the door. The first captain stood outside. He apologized for waking him, and said that the lord of the territory wished to meet him in person. Kettle blinked in surprise. He said that if a noble lord wanted to meet someone like him, then that was definitely unexpected, but he was fully on board. He asked if they should leave right away and said he would get dressed quickly. The captain found himself wondering again whether this really was the same man who had one-shotted a dungeon boss. He was taking all of this far too casually. As they walked through the city, Kettle looked around with wide-eyed wonder. The night before, the streets had been dark and quiet, but under the morning sun, everything felt alive. He said it looked just like a game and marveled at every little detail around him. The captain, growing more impatient by the second. He told him they would take a shortcut to avoid any distractions. Before long, they arrived. The captain announced that the barbarian had been brought. Luke gave the order to let him in. As the doors opened, Luke extended a hand in greeting and formally introduced himself as the Lord of the Domain. Kettle answered warmly, addressing Luke with proper respect and introducing himself simply as the Barbarian Kettle. He even gave a polite bow. Luke was caught off guard. Barbarians did not bow, they did not lower their heads. Their entire culture revolved around pride and strength. Yet this one was already shattering expectation after expectation. Luke acknowledged that perhaps this barbarian had learned a thing or two and invited him to sit. Kettle took a seat across from him and immediately began looking around the richly decorated room. Without holding anything back, he said that being inside a noble's castle was incredible. He had always been fascinated by castles, and this one far exceeded his expectations. Then his eyes landed on the knight standing beside Luke. He lit up at once and said that as a child, he used to play games about knights, so seeing a real one like this felt like a dream come true. The knight narrowed his eyes. To him, that look was not admiration. It felt like naked killing intent. His expression hardened as he thought that this man had made a grave mistake by bringing such bloodlust into the presence of a lord. In that instant, he judged that Kettle would not be walking out alive. Luke, however, remained composed and began asking his questions. He explained that the reason he had summoned Kettle was simple. There were a few things he needed to confirm, and once that was done, Kettle would be free to go. Kettle smiled and said he was ready. Luke could ask whatever he wanted. Luke's first question was where Kettle came from. Kettle said that was a meaningful question, then answered clearly. He came from the coldest place in the world, a land buried in endless white. Luke and the knight exchanged a glance. They understood immediately what he meant, the white snowfield. And if that was true, then the man before them really was the barbarian of legend. Luke admitted that his words were difficult to believe. Kettle replied that the place he described was miserable, and whether they believed him or not was up to them. Luke gave a slow nod, then shifted to what truly interested him. He said that origin was not what mattered most here, strength was. He wanted to know how powerful Kettle really was. Kettle looked him straight in the eye and said that it was the wrong question. The truth was, he had no way to measure his strength in this land. Luke leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward his knight, as a silent understanding passed between them. Then he looked back at Kettle and proposed a sparring match against his knight, offering a generous reward in return. He made it clear that it would not be a fight to the death, only a controlled exchange, and he trusted that Kettle could keep it within reason. Kettle laughed the moment he heard it, his voice bright with excitement. Luke raised a brow at the unexpected reaction. Most people would have shown at least a little concern when told they were about to duel a trained knight. But Kettle was grinning from ear to ear. To him, the chance to spar with a knight, a real knight from a fantasy world who wielded aura and mysterious swordsmanship, was beyond thrilling. This was not just a fight, it was an opportunity to witness something legendary firsthand and maybe even learn from it. In the end, barbarians were still barbarians. No matter how civilized they seemed, they could never completely hide that primal love of battle. Soon they reached the Colosseum. From the stands above, Luke watched. As our boy Kettle and the knight faced each other in silence. Under his breath, he muttered that he hoped no blood would be spilled today. The signal was given. The knight spoke first, his voice full of arrogant authority, declaring that Kettle should consider it an honor to witness his blade. Kettle simply answered that he was genuinely excited. That casual response only irritated the knight even more. He charged forward and activated his aura. Green light surged around his body, wrapping him in focused energy. Then with a single motion, he lunged at Kettle and projected 3 spectral blades from his sword, all aimed directly at the barbarian's head. Kettle dodged them with ease. Then he thinks, almost fascinated, that there really are 3 blades, and every single one of them is real, not an illusion. He seemed amused and asked if that strange trick was what the knight called swordsmanship. The knight clicked his tongue, clearly unimpressed. He said that while Kettle's ability to evade was surprising, he obviously had no way to fight back. So the knight charged again, fully convinced that the end was near. But Kettle calmly raised a hand, and with nothing more than a flick of his finger, he shattered the knight's blade. The knight barely had time to react before Kettle placed a hand against his chest. Then with slow and deliberate force, he clenched his fist and crushed the knight's armor like paper. In the very next motion, he hurled him backward, sending him smashing into a wall with a deafening crash. Luke's eyes went wide. His knight, a top-tier warrior, had been dismantled in a single exchange. The arena itself bore the proof. The floor gouged open, and a knight collapsed in a broken heap. Kettle turned toward Luke and casually asked if the match was over. Luke struggled to answer. He forced a nod and hoarsely said yes. Inside, panic was already taking hold. For a man to do all that in a single strike, he had to be superhuman, and even that felt like a conservative guess. There was no telling how deep his strength actually ran. If someone like him were left unchecked, he might very well upset the balance of the entire world. In that moment, Luke decided this had to be reported to someone capable of properly judging such power, a true swordmaster. He noted out loud that Cain, one of the few men worthy of that title, should be arriving soon. Perhaps this would interest him. Back in his chambers, Luke's thoughts were interrupted by a voice. Kane himself casually asked if Luke was referring to him. Luke turned toward the open window and saw the old man standing there. He let out a sigh and remarked that Kane's habit of sneaking into places was just as unpleasant as ever. Kane grinned and said that a man needed some fun. Then he asked whether this supposedly interesting matter would be explained now or later. Luke stood and greeted him properly, addressing him as Lord Kane, and thanking him for coming on such short notice. Meanwhile, the knight regained consciousness in the infirmary. His clothes were torn, his armor was in pieces, but somehow his body itself was still intact. Luke entered and asked how he felt. The knight apologized for failing him. Kane, standing nearby, said that the blame was his for allowing his foolish student to face an opponent he had not properly measured. He examined the knight, then remarked in surprise that his body showed no injuries at all. No fractures, no bruises, nothing. The armor had been destroyed, yet the flesh beneath it was untouched. That could only mean one thing: the barbarian had held back. He was not just some brute swinging wildly. He had absolute control over his power, and strength of that level combined with such precise restraint was incredibly rare. Kane declared that the barbarian's strength was clearly beyond that of a knight. At minimum, he was superhuman. Luke and the knight exchanged startled looks. After a pause, Luke somewhat awkwardly asked how Kettle's strength compared to Kane's own. Kane answered with complete confidence. He said that the barbarian might indeed be strong, remarkably so, but he was a swordmaster. Superhuman strength by itself would never be enough to surpass him. Luke let out a relieved laugh and agreed, but then Kane added something far more unsettling. To the best of his knowledge, Kettle had not even used aura. That level of destructive power without aura made no sense at all. Kane wondered out loud whether this was simply what it meant to be a barbarian from the White Wasteland. Luke admitted that he had doubted it at first, but now he believed it completely. Kettle truly must be the barbarian of legend. Kane turned the story over in his mind. A tale of a lone human from the frozen lands, a being more beast than man. Perhaps a monster wrapped in human skin. For a moment he almost believed it, but then he reconsidered. If Kettle really were a monster, then why had he spared the knight? Why show mercy at all? He said that perhaps he was mistaken. Luke asked what he meant, but Kane brushed it aside and said it was not important. There were other matters he had been sent to handle, and the Emperor's strange requests were piling up. Luke nodded and accepted that. Then Kane asked whether Kettle was still in the city. Luke said that as far as he knew he was. Kettle had mentioned that he intended to stay for a while. At that, Kane turned and said that he would meet the barbarian himself. Elsewhere, the first captain sat with Kettle and asked what he planned to do next. Kettle admitted that he still had not decided. He appreciated the reward Luke had given him, but he already felt that wandering from territory to territory and clearing dungeons would eventually grow tiresome. The captain told him there were two ways forward. He could either find someone of high status willing to sponsor him and vouch for his identity, or he could become a mercenary. Kettle asked him to explain further, so the captain did. If Kettle built up a record as a mercenary and proved himself through successful requests, he could eventually earn official recognition and have his status acknowledged. But until he reached that point, mercenaries were basically treated like disposable labor. The captain added, with the tone of someone speaking from experience, that he had once been one himself. Then he said that with Kettle's strength, finding a sponsor would probably be much easier. Kettle seemed genuinely surprised that such a path even existed. The captain confirmed that mercenaries were monster hunters, errand runners, and everything in between. Sponsorship, on the other hand, was a shortcut, but only if someone powerful enough was willing to put their name behind him. Kettle was clearly intrigued. He said that being a mercenary, someone who roamed the world taking on requests and hunting monsters, sounded like the ultimate fantasy dream. In that case, he asked where he needed to go to become one. The captain told him there was a guild hall. Kettle immediately said he would appreciate it if the captain could show him the way. The first captain agreed, though he admitted he was curious about why Kettle wanted this so badly. Some people, he said, found romance in the idea of a mercenary's life, roaming the world, taking on dangerous missions, living freely. But the reality was much uglier. Mercenaries without recognized status sat at the very bottom of society. Even those with some reputation often died in unidentified dungeons. They were treated as expendable and sent to do the dirtiest work. That was why the lower levels of mercenary society were filthy, disgraceful, and loud. Inside the mercenary guild hall, one man got punched square in the face and crashed onto the floor. He staggered back up and asked the other if he wanted another round. The other man told him to bring it on. Around them, the rest of the mercenaries simply watched and started placing bets. Behind the reception desk, a woman let out a long sigh as the commotion continued. A coworker called over and asked how the new recruits were looking today. Her name was Rosa, and she answered that it was awful. Nothing but weirdos. One of them was some lunatic claiming to be a paladin. The others were rogues. Even the nun looked fine on the surface, but nobody trusted her because of the god she served. Rosa looked completely drained. Her coworker said that was disappointing. Rosa complained that not a single decent person had walked through the door all day. She added that these muscle-brained mercenaries kept starting fights non-stop, and said that if only a handsome prince on a white horse would come rescue her from this desk job. At that exact moment, the door swung open. Rosa's eyes lit up as she looked up hopefully. Maybe her wish had come true. But lo and behold, it was our boy Kettle. Kettle asked if this was the guild hall. The men who had been in the middle of fighting stopped, and everyone turned to stare. Whispers immediately spread through the room as people asked if a barbarian had really just walked into the mercenary guild. Kettle, meanwhile, looked thrilled to be there. He said that he had come to become a mercenary. Clearly intimidated, Rosa asked why he wanted to do that. Kettle explained that he had several reasons, but the main one was that he had heard mercenary work could eventually help him get his status officially recognized. Rosa confirmed that it was true but warned him that to reach that point, he would need to build up a considerable number of accomplishments. Then she asked if he was really all right with that. Kettle said that he was. So Rosa told him the registration fee was 5 silver coins and asked for his name and age. Kettle gave her his name but admitted that he was not entirely sure how old he was. She told him she would just write down something that seemed reasonable. Then she handed him a registration form and a mercenary badge. She explained that it represented his status and that he absolutely must not lose it. Kettle looked down at the badge. Hen picked it up. His eyes lit up like a child on a holiday morning. He asked what kinds of jobs were available and whether he could take one right away. Rosa corrected him, saying they were called requests, not jobs, then handed him the ones he currently qualified for. Kettle looked over the list and asked if that was really all there was. Herb gathering, basement cleaning, sewer cleaning, street cleaning, and night patrol. She explained that as an F-rank mercenary, those were the only kinds of requests he could accept for now. She also admitted that she had heard barbarians were proud and was a little worried he might get offended. But if he started with simple tasks and built a record, he would eventually qualify for more difficult work. Kettle said he would take this one, then pointed to herb gathering. Rosa asked if he was sure. He said yes, that was the one and he was perfectly fine with it. Then he asked where he had to go to gather them. She told him it was just outside the village and showed him a drawing of what the herbs looked like. Kettle said he would head out immediately. Rosa said all right. She was a little surprised by how calm he was. And just like that, he left. Her co-worker, on the other hand, was completely losing it. Kettle made his way into the woods. Before long, he found herbs that matched the drawing. He noted that they were good for treating wounds, though they looked a little strange. Then he took off his shirt, mentioned that he had packed some protection against ultraviolet light, and declared that it was time for his first request as a mercenary. About an hour later, he returned with an entire bag full of herbs. He asked if it was enough. Rosa stared at the haul and said that it was a lot. For a moment, she even wondered whether he might actually be some criminal mastermind sent to wipe out the entire herb field. But then she noticed something else. Every single herb was in excellent condition. Most mercenaries just tore them out of the ground like savages and ruined their value, but these had been gathered carefully. Kettle said that even if he did not look like it, he was actually quite confident in his delicate touch. Rosa said she understood and thanked him for his hard work. Then she handed him the reward for completing the request, 1 silver coin. It was barely enough to buy the cheapest meal, but it was the first money Kettle had ever earned through honest labor in this world, and he was ecstatic. He immediately asked for another request. Rosa still could not believe the way he was acting, especially considering that he was a barbarian. Kettle said the sun was still high in the sky, so he wanted to get as much work done as possible. Rosa watched him for a moment, wondering why he looked so happy. Then she quietly came to a conclusion. This new guy was definitely a weirdo too. Kettle announces that he is taking on the next request, mentioning the warehouse cleaning task, though it is already clear from the request list that he has completed several others before this. Rosa points out that after gathering herbs, this is actually the 3rd cleaning assignment he has chosen. She wonders out loud whether he has some strange love for cleaning. Then she tells him that if he enjoys it that much, he should go right ahead. Kettle heads to the warehouse and steps inside. A woman looks up in surprise, and he tells her that he is here to clean. She immediately begins to panic, visibly shaken, and he asks whether she is the owner. She confirms that she is, but then questions why a barbarian is standing in her warehouse. Later, Kettle explains that the cleaning itself was simple enough. There was no need to move anything especially heavy. After that, he moved on to street cleaning. He picked up a broom and started sweeping. At first, controlling his strength was difficult, but with enough concentration, he managed not to destroy either the broom or the pavement. During all of that, someone is watching him. It is none other than Old Man Kane. Wearing a ridiculous disguise and peeking from around a corner, he mutters to himself, completely baffled by what he is seeing. Kane knows that Kettle possesses power great enough to shake an entire kingdom. If the full extent of that power were made known, it would demand respect and fear anywhere in the world. And yet here he is, a force of nature in human form, carrying out menial labor as though it were something sacred. Kane stares in disbelief, unable to understand why someone like Kettle would choose to live this way. Kettle, meanwhile, is completely absorbed in his work. The next morning arrives with birdsong, and Kettle stirs awake in bed. As he sits up, his eyes fall on a pouch. Resting on the bedside table, it is from the previous day's requests. Rosa had dropped it off herself. She had praised his performance on his first day as a mercenary, and rewarded him for completing all 15 tasks. Each one earned him 1 silver coin, giving him a total of 15. Kettle expresses his gratitude and says that he will return again tomorrow. Then he declares that it is time to begin his second day in civilization. Elsewhere, a child is sobbing loudly in the street, while concerned townspeople gather nearby. Kettle walks past calmly, then pauses when he notices a building marked as a library. He steps inside. A woman at the desk greets him. He asks whether he may read some books. She nods, intimidated. Once inside, Kettle begins pulling books from the shelves and flipping through them one after another. The The librarian watches in stunned silence. Kane, though hidden from sight, is close enough to sense what is happening, and he is just as shocked. A barbarian reading books clashes with everything he thinks he knows. He starts wondering whether the people of the White Snowfield possess some hidden culture unknown to the rest of the world, or whether Kettle is simply a rare exception. Kettle closes one of the books and says that the Empire ended up winning. He recalls that a few years ago, Milena had come to the Snowfield saying she intended to sell weapons to whichever side prevailed, whether the kingdom or the Empire. Apparently the Empire came out on top. Now it is staggeringly powerful, and the kingdom of Jehant has effectively become its vassal. The Empire has already swallowed half the human world and continues to expand relentlessly, as if it intends to dominate everything. Kettle thinks for a moment about their conquests, then shakes his head. That is enough human history for now. He flips to another section, eager to read about the non-human races. He says that there must be truly fantastic things written here. He reads about Golmentamia, the dwarven cave overflowing with rare ores. Then there is Pizarapia, the hidden village of fairies. Legemiria, the floating city of celestials, and Elfo Sagrado, the secret sanctuary of the elves, so well hidden that even the most powerful rulers in the world have failed to find it. Kettle comments that perhaps he now qualifies as someone worthy of seeking it out. Then his expression changes as he realizes something even deeper. He reads about places like the White Snowfield. In the Demon Zones, vast hostile regions that reject human life entirely, there are 5 such zones. The Silent Forest, where all things are swallowed by silence. The Abyss, which drags the world into depths of evil. The Deep Sea, where primates breathe and survive. The Hollowing Pit, a place of absolute void. And finally, the White Snowfield itself. Within these lands dwell horrifying beings known as anomalies, and yet none of those monsters ever cross into the human world. Kettle begins to grasp just how enormous this world truly is. The White Snowfield alone is already unimaginably vast, and yet it is only one among many such regions. Eventually, he concludes that this is all the information the library has to offer. He thanks the librarian for allowing him to read, and she nods, saying that it was no trouble at all. Kettle leaves the library and makes his way back to the Mercenary Guild. He approaches Rosa and asks what requests are available today. She jumps slightly at his sudden appearance, then hands him the request forms. He looks visibly excited. Watching from a distance, Kane mutters to himself that Kettle is completely insane, and at last he decides that he needs to confront him directly. That evening, as Kettle walks home, he reflects out loud that he completed about a dozen more requests that day. Even the smaller ones add up, and the work itself feels surprisingly fulfilling. At this pace, he says, it will not be long before he is officially recognized as a true mercenary. Just then, Kane steps out from behind a corner. Kettle notices him immediately and asks what is going on. Kane only glares in silence. Kettle then says that he has known all day that he was being followed. Kane is stunned. He had suppressed his presence completely. No one should have been able to detect him, not even someone with exceptional senses. Kettle eyes him carefully and wonders out loud if he is a bandit, instinctively shifting to protect his coin pouch. Kane stares at him in disbelief at the accusation. Kettle then declares that since Kane is not responding, his guess must be correct. He adds that even in a place with decent security, bandits still manage to lurk around. Kane protests and mutters something about being a swordmaster, though even he doubts that Kettle would believe him right now. Kettle shakes his head and says it is pathetic, resorting to robbery at such an old age. He even remarks that the economy must be worse than he thought. Then he considers that defeating Kane and turning him in might make a nice addition to his growing record as a mercenary. Kane is baffled by Kettle's insistence on seeing him as a bandit, but inwardly he admits that this might actually work in his favor. If Kettle truly believes that, then confronting him directly may be the best way to measure both his power and his true nature. As Kettle begins to walk toward him, Kane feels a flicker of unease rise in his chest. Then, without warning, Kettle's body sways. In the next instant, he vanishes from sight. Kane blinks in confusion, trying to understand what just happened. But before he can react, Kettle reappears right in front of him, his hand already reaching forward with clear intent. Kane instantly realizes that if he hesitates for even a moment, Kettle will seize the back of his neck. He barely manages to dodge. Kettle steps back intrigued and says that was not bad at all, clearly impressed by Kane's reaction speed. Kane snaps back that there is no way he almost got caught, but deep down he knows it was far too close. If his reflexes had been even slightly slower, Kettle would have grabbed him without effort. What truly unnerves him, though, is the complete absence of aura. Kettle moved with inhuman speed, yet there was no energy signature at all. Kettle says that this is getting interesting. Kane can hardly believe it. This kind of speed, this kind of pressure, all coming from a purely physical body. He tells himself to stop thinking about testing Kettle and start preparing for a real fight. With a sharp breath, he charges and declares that he is going all out. Kettle braces himself, then vanishes once again, before Kane can even process the movement. A hand clamps onto his arm. Kane says out loud that even after broadening his perception, he still could not react in time. Kettle begins twisting his wrist, and Kane grits his teeth in pain. To him, it feels like being jammed into solid rock and dragged through it against his will. Pain shoots up his arm as he cries out and demands to know what kind of monster possesses this kind of strength. He admits that in terms of raw physical power, this is not a fair contest. And if that is the case, then there is only one option left. He has to unleash everything. Kane releases his aura, and a deep green energy erupts from within him. Kettle notices it at once as the mana radiates outward, and for the first time he looks visibly taken aback. The aura explodes in a wave of green light, forcing Kane backward. Kettle, however, remains standing exactly where he is, holding a handful of the aura in his hand as if it were nothing. Kane stares, readying himself to fight again. But Kettle only remarks that bandits these days really do have all sorts of tricks up their sleeves. Kane is speechless. He still thinks he is a bandit. Trying to explain, Kane says that what Kettle just witnessed is the manifestation of mana, a technique only the most elite warriors can achieve. He says that he has cloaked his entire body in it, something no mere bandit could ever hope to do. And yet Kettle still treats all of this like some petty roadside robbery. Kane reflects on what just happened. He had not intended to, but in that moment he reflexively released his mana at full power. Manifested aura like that can slice through steel with ease. An ordinary human would have been torn apart just from making contact with it. But Kettle stood there completely unharmed. Kane wonders what kind of body could withstand manifested aura without any visible defense of its own. Kettle, completely unfazed, says that he does not understand the trick Kane just used, but it is time to end this. Kane reaches for his blade. Then he freezes. Kettle is already there, stopping the draw with a single finger. Kane tries again, grunting as he pours all his strength into the motion, but nothing happens. The sword does not move. He watches in disbelief as the hilt begins to bend under the pressure of Kettle's finger alone. That is when he realizes just how bad this is. Kettle reaches out again, his arm stretching forward. Kane sees it coming, and a single tear rolls down his cheek. He mutters that this must be the end. Later that night, Kettle strolls through town with Kane slung over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. He says out loud that the fight was surprisingly fun, and that he still cannot believe a so-called bandit knew techniques that flashy. Eventually, he arrives at the city guard post. The guard captain stares at the sight in complete disbelief. Kettle casually lifts Kane by the back of his shirt like a captured animal and presents him. The captain demands to know what the hell is going on and why Kane, of all people, is there. He asks whether Kettle attacked him, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. Kettle answers plainly that he caught a bandit. The captain is stunned into silence. Kettle then asks whether turning him in counts toward his mercenary record, hoping to get some credit for it. But the captain is too shocked to answer properly. His thoughts race. Kane, Sir Kane, is known as the kingdom's only swordmaster, a man who has reached the pinnacle of superhuman ability. And yet here he is, dangling in the air like a criminal after being defeated in broad daylight by a barbarian. At last, the captain tells Kettle that Kane is not a bandit. Kettle raises a brow and asks if the captain knows him. Then he asks if he is Kane's accomplice. The captain quickly straightens up, bows with the utmost respect, and says that he pays his deepest respects to the swordmaster, the only one in the kingdom. Kettle blinks, still confused. Kane keeps his eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Kettle says none of this makes sense. Why would a swordmaster be lurking around like a common thief? He insists that Kane tried to steal his silver coins. The captain assures him once again that Kane really is the swordmaster and that there is no way he could mistake his face. Kettle then wonders out loud whether Kane might actually be a mage using some kind of illusion magic. The captain says that if there were a mage capable of convincingly pretending to be Kane, that person would be just as famous as the swordmaster himself. Kettle then asks if Swordmaster is just a more elegant title for a bandit. The captain, completely exasperated, asks what the hell he is even talking about. An awkward silence follows. Finally, Kettle asks again whether Kane really is a swordmaster. The captain confirms that it is true. Kettle looks visibly shaken. The captain says that he will need to report this to the Lord immediately. The scene then jumps to Lord Luke slamming his desk in disbelief. He shouts, demanding confirmation that Sir Kane actually lost. Later, Kettle apologizes, admitting that he should have given Kane a chance to explain himself. Kane replies that it is his own fault for remaining silent. Then the two of them fall into an awkward silence. Luke tries to process everything. He had expected Kane to confront the barbarian in a proper duel, not to be completely defeated. He does not know the exact details, but from everything he can tell, it was a clear loss. Which means the barbarian is stronger than the kingdom's only swordmaster. He reflects on the hierarchy of superhumans. Kane only recently reached that level, so he is probably still on the lower end. Even so, becoming a swordmaster means earning one of the noblest titles in the entire realm, and Kettle beat him. Luke lets out a heavy sigh and mutters that his head is starting to hurt. He acknowledges that there has obviously been a massive misunderstanding and decides to step away. He tells the two men that they should probably sit down and talk things through properly. Then he leaves the room and shuts the door behind him. Kettle continues staring. Kane begins to sweat nervously. Inwardly, he admits that this is beyond humiliating. The defeat was not merely bad, it was flawless. His pride has been torn to pieces. He slowly sets down his teacup, gathering what little composure he has left. Then, with all the dignity he can manage, he formally introduces himself. Kettle asks whether Swordmaster is actually his surname. Kane answers that once someone reaches his level, surnames no longer matter. Kettle nods, intrigued. Then he asks about the technique Kane used earlier. Kane is caught off guard by the question, but he produces a small swirl of aura in his hand and asks whether that is what Kettle means. Kettle immediately lights up. He says that at first he dismissed it as some cheap bandit trick, but now that he knows it is a real swordmaster ability, he wants to learn more about it. Kane explains that it is called aura, an embodiment of the mystic. Kettle is thrilled. At last, he is seeing mystic energy with his own eyes in this fantasy world. He immediately asks whether Kane can teach him how to use it. Kane explains that to manifest aura, one must directly control the mystic. Kettle asks whether mystic is similar to mana. Kane tells him that mystic is the energy itself. If someone shapes it into aura, they become a swordsman. If they channel it as mana, they become a mage. Kettle finds that fascinating. Then he asks again whether Kane would be willing to teach him. He humbly admits that he is still lacking in knowledge and is trying to improve. He even says please, the type that Kane would find it hard to refuse. He asks whether Kettle really needs his guidance at all. After all, he is already stronger. Kettle replies that he knows nothing about aura or swordsmanship and that until now he has only been swinging blindly. Kane asks if he is serious, but then regains his composure. He reminds himself that he is a swordmaster, and while he may have lost, he never even drew his blade. So he resolves to teach this barbarian the way of the sword, and use that process to reclaim his shattered pride. He declares that without his sword, he is only half a man anyway. Kettle says that he figured as much. Kane's weakness during their fight made a lot more sense now since he never drew his sword. Kane, slightly deflated, admits that that is exactly what happened. Kettle goes on to say that it felt strange hearing someone with Kane's current performance be called a swordmaster, but that if he had actually drawn his blade, he might have had a chance at winning. Kane, however, is not entirely convinced that the outcome would have changed. And while Kettle is clearly eager to begin the lessons, Kane cannot help reflecting inwardly. He wonders whether this training will only chip away at his confidence even more. Kettle tells him that before arriving in this kingdom, he did study a form of swordsmanship, but this is real fantasy swordsmanship. It manipulates mystic aura in ways his old training never even came close to, and that is exactly the kind of power he wants to learn. Kane explains that his unique style is centered around turning illusion into reality. Then he asks whether Kettle noticed that when he fought his disciple. Kettle says that he had not realized that Knight was Kane's disciple, but now that Kane mentions it, he does remember the Knight's sword splitting into three and all three of those blades were real. He wonders out loud whether this embodiment technique relies more on finesse than brute force. Kane confirms that it does. He explains that true swordsmanship is the fusion of blade and aura, an art that allows the wielder to harness the mystic itself, and at the end of that path stands the swordmaster. As he speaks, Kane draws his sword and channels aura through it. Kettle watches with wide-eyed excitement and blurts out that it looks incredible. Kane agrees, though he is still struggling to process what he is about to do. If he is really going to teach this so-called barbarian swordsmanship, then he says he may as well go all out. He adds that embodiment of illusion into reality may sound abstract, so he will demonstrate it instead. Taking a deep breath, Kane steadies his stance and swings his sword, the blade wrapped in surging aura. The ground shatters beneath the force of the strike, and then the attack splits apart, fracturing into 5 separate arcs that shoot across the room and carve destruction into everything in their path. Kettle is stunned. The trajectory has duplicated itself 5-fold, reaching the far walls with terrifying precision. Kane explains that many techniques use aura to create illusions, but his swordsmanship goes one step further. He gives those illusions substance. Kettle repeats the name of the technique and admits that it impressed him. Thinking the moment has landed exactly the way it should, Kane asks if he was amazed. But Kettle says something completely unexpected. He says he feels like he could probably do it too. Kane blinks, stunned by the sheer absurdity of what he just heard. He demands to know what kind of nonsense that is. He has spent his entire life training, combining rare talent with merciless discipline to reach this level. There is no way anyone could imitate such mastery after seeing it only once. Kettle just shrugs and says it would be easier to show than explain. He steps aside and grabs something, not a sword, but an axe. Adjusting his stance, he plants his feet firmly and raises the axe behind him. Then he swings. The movement is not elegant, and it lacks the refined aura control that Kane displayed, but the result is impossible to deny. Multiple impact waves tear outward, matching the pattern of Kane's technique. A deafening explosion follows, shaking the entire room. Smoke rises from the axe as Kettle turns to Kane and asks how that was. Kane answers that yes, visually it did resemble his technique, but the resemblance came from raw speed and monstrous strength, not actual refinement. He admits that for a moment he was genuinely fooled, but in the end it was still just brute force. Kettle points out that in combat the result is what matters. If the effect is the same, then surely that counts for something. Kane reflects on that, then reluctantly admits that it is hard to argue with that logic, no matter how deeply it bruises his pride. Then he declares that if Kettle thinks he can replicate anything, he wants him to try this next. Kane prepares himself once more, but this time instead of focusing aura into his sword, he channels it into his body. Then in a burst, multiple images of Kane split away from him and spread through the space. A wave of condensed aura erupts from the center and detonates into a tremendous blast. Apparently, the training grounds are not meant to know peace. Kane explains that this is bodily separation achieved through mastery of aura control, and he asks whether Kettle can copy this one too. Kettle steps back a few paces, adjusts his grip on the axe and focuses. Slowly, shadowy figures begin peeling away from him, clones made of swirling purple aura. Kane is now too stunned to speak. Then with a roar, the clones burst outward, forming a vortex of violent energy that tears the entire area apart. Kettle then asks what Kane thinks about his technique. Kane drops to his knees, his face crumples, then he starts crying. He says out loud that what Kettle just did was the culmination of his entire life's work, and yet he copied it in mere seconds. Kane sobs, unable to accept that his swordsmanship could feel so worthless. The pain hits him so deeply that he starts clutching his chest as if he is having a heart attack. Kettle, completely unfazed, says that Kane's mind is fragile like toilet paper. If he used it, he would poke right through it in one wipe. Still, he tells him sincerely that his swordsmanship is remarkable. Kane slowly looks up. Kettle clarifies that what he just did was only a fast swing, nothing more. The technique Kane demonstrated was something real, something Kettle still cannot do. He openly admits that he has not reached that level of mystic mastery. Kane steadies his breathing and blinks away the rest of his tears. Then he nods and says Kettle is right. His swordsmanship does have value. He just needs to accept that the problem is not his technique. The problem is that Kettle is completely insane. He wonders what kind of monster can move fast enough to blur without using aura at all. No human should be capable of that. Kettle then asks if Kane can teach him the true meaning of technique. Kane takes a breath, realizing that he let his emotions run far too wild, and apologizes. He explains that in order to use true technique, one must first master aura control. But aura control only comes after one comprehends the mystery. He explains that no mage, swordsman, or witch can reach the upper realms of power without awakening to mystery. The only exception, he says, are those who serve divine entities. Kettle asks whether divine power is something separate, and Kane confirms that it is. He says that miracles granted by gods do not rely on the user's own ability, but on divine will alone. Kettle listens closely. Kane tells him that mystic power is the mystery that exists within oneself. The way a person chooses to wield that power determines everything. If Kettle wants to use aura, manipulate mana, or even command spirits, it all begins with understanding the mystery. Then he explains that mystery is divided into 5 stages. The most basic of these is mystery perception, the ability to sense, awaken to, and recognize mystic energy. Kettle asks whether just anyone can sense it, and Kane shakes his head. Without talent, a person cannot even feel it. Those who can perceive the mystery are classified as third-rate. Kane says that the ability to interact with mystery is divided into 5 classes, and third-rate is where it begins. Kettle's eyes narrow as something clicks in his memory. He remembers hearing something similar from Milena 5 years ago. He says that this mystery classification must be what she was talking about. Kane explains that the differences between individuals within the same class can be enormous, and the lines between levels are anything but clear. He emphasizes that all he wants right now is for Kettle to understand that the concept exists. Kettle nods and says he gets it. Kane then tells him that it is time to begin. The first step, he says, is sensing mystery. Kane instructs Kettle to feel everything around him, not just with his body but with a heightened awareness. He tells him that he must reach beyond the physical and awaken a dormant sense he has never used before. He needs to notice the breeze brushing against his skin, the pressure of the earth beneath him, and the currents moving through the air. Somewhere within that awareness, Kane says, there is a presence unlike any other. The mystic. Kettle gives it a try. He sits down, closes his eyes, and focuses as deeply as he can. A few moments pass before he opens his eyes again, and bluntly states that he cannot feel anything, nothing at all. Kane stares at him, genuinely caught off guard. He did not expect that answer. He asks if Kettle is really sure, because someone with that level of physical ability should at least have the faintest spark of perception. Even people without mana can sometimes sense it. But after thinking for a moment, he concedes that perhaps Kettle is simply an exception. Maybe it has something to do with being raised in the White Wasteland. Kane admits that barbarians from that place are impossible to predict. Kettle says he does not know. He has never heard anyone speak of the mystic where he comes from. Most people there do not even think deeply enough to understand the concept. Kane assures him that sensing the mystic is difficult, even for trained individuals, and suggests they try something more direct instead. He says he wants to channel aura into Kettle and stimulate the mystical pathway that way. Kettle immediately lights up and asks if Kane is going to transfer aura. Kane says it is something like that, and tells him to get ready. He instructs Kettle to relax, steady his awareness, and focus inward so he can feel the flow of energy Kane is about to send into him. But the moment Kane places a hand on Kettle, he freezes. He mutters under his breath that Kettle's body is abnormal. It feels like carved stone. The sheer density of his muscles is inhuman. For a moment, Kane even wonders whether this man can really be called human at all. Kettle notices the silence and asks if something is wrong. Kane quickly snaps out of it and says he is ready to begin. He explains that the key to unlocking the mystic is to find the inner path where aura naturally flows. That is what they are trying to awaken. But as he starts the process, Kane immediately feels that something is wrong. He tries again and again. He sends wave after wave of aura into Kettle's body, but nothing happens. It feels like swimming through an abyss, reaching for something that simply is not there. The deeper he tries to push the aura, the more crushing resistance he feels. Eventually, he pulls his hand away and says it will not work. Kettle blinks in confusion and asks if that means he lacks the talent. Kane quickly tells him no, it is not a matter of talent. The problem is that his aura cannot reach deeply enough inside him. To awaken the mystic, the energy has to touch something buried deep within. In Kettle's case, it simply cannot get there. Kettle asks if that means the mystical path does not exist inside him. Kane says it is not that simple. The truth is he could not even confirm whether it exists or not. Kettle presses him, asking what that is supposed to mean. Kane explains that his body is unnatural. Its density, its structure, the way it is built, none of it is compatible with normal aura transmission. It is like trying to pour light into a black hole. The aura does not travel. He theorizes that Kettle's overwhelming physicality may be interfering with the process itself. Kettle lets out a sigh and asks if not even a swordmaster can help him unlock the mystic. Kane hesitates, then admits that he does not know. This is beyond anything he has ever encountered. He advises Kettle to find a swordmaster who specializes in aura, or perhaps visit the Mage's Tower and be examined there. Either way, he apologizes for failing to help. Kettle shrugs and says it is fine. Just knowing that there is still a chance is enough for him. He gets to his feet, thanks Kane, and says he still learned a lot. Kane is left quietly reflecting. Every barbarian he has ever known was like a wild beast, drunk, violent, obsessed with destruction. Society had no place for people like that, but this one is different. He asks Kettle whether he would consider joining the kingdom. Kettle asks what exactly he means. Kane explains that he wants Kettle to pledge loyalty and receive a formal rank. With strength like his, he could climb through the hierarchy quickly, and Kane himself would personally sponsor him. Kettle says it is an appealing offer, but he declines. He values his freedom far too much. Kane realizes, almost bitterly, that if they had someone like Kettle on their side, they might actually begin to break free from the Empire's grip. So he tries one more time, asking whether even a noble title would tempt him. It is not an offer he would make lightly. Kettle thinks it over for a moment, then says that while it is tempting, he would rather live on his own terms. Kane nods and says he understands. Kettle thanks him again and promises that he will not forget his kindness. Kane watches him go and quietly speaks to himself. He says he was a fool to think he could ever control someone like that. It is impossible. Kettle moves entirely on his own terms, and while he may choose to cooperate with others, he belongs to no one. Whatever goes on inside his head is a mystery, and that might make him even more dangerous than the average barbarian. He reflects on how absurd it all is. A being who looks as though he crawled out of the demon realm itself is walking the earth as a barbarian from the White Wasteland, and now the Empire is talking about conquering the demon realm as well. Kane mutters that the whole idea is insane, and wonders what exactly the Emperor is thinking. The scene shifts to Luke receiving a new report. As he listens, he scoffs and says that it all sounds ridiculous. Kane confirms that it is true, people are dying during reconnaissance missions. Luke asks if he is serious. Kane nods and says that he is. Then he wonders out loud whether this man might somehow be a reborn emperor from ages long past. Whatever the truth is, he says, it is a problem for another day. Humanity has not even finished conquering its own world yet. Luke says that it is only a matter of time. Kane agrees but warns that their region still lies within the Empire's reach, and they could be drawn into action at any moment. He tells Luke to be prepared. Luke thanks him for the warning. Kane exhales slowly and says that the world is already a mess. And now, with the Emperor sinking deeper into madness, things are only getting worse. Luke suddenly looks up in surprise and asks whether the rumors are actually true. Kane confirms that they are. The demons have begun to move. Luke's expression tightens with worry. Kane adds that dungeon outbreaks are also occurring at a strange and unusual rate. It has not been confirmed yet, but some believe the taint of the demon realm is beginning to seep into the world. Whatever is happening, he says, it can only mean trouble for humanity. Then, almost like an afterthought, he wonders aloud what if the problem is not something that is coming, but something that is already here among them. Luke confirms that the rumors are true, though his tone carries more exhaustion than certainty. When Kane asks what he thinks, Luke admits that he does not know what to make of any of it, but one thing is clear to him. Kettle is not an enemy. Beyond that, however, he cannot say where the barbarian truly stands. Kettle strolls through the streets, but the reactions around him are anything but welcoming. One child shrinks back behind his mother, trembling. Another villager ducks into a building the moment Kettle passes by. Kettle notices and tilts his head, wondering out loud if it is his appearance that scares them. He glances down at his current outfit, nothing more than a vest made from beast hide. He admits that while it is perfectly acceptable by barbarian standards, it probably does not leave the most civilized impression, so he concludes that people must think he is insane or dangerous. He is completely wrong, of course, but that is still enough for him to make up his mind. He announces that it is time to buy real clothes. The moment he enters a clothing shop, the shopkeeper starts to greet him, only to recoil in fear the instant he gets a proper look at him. Kettle calmly explains that he is there to buy clothes. The man stammers out an apology and says they do not have anything in his size. Kettle tilts his head again, clearly finding that inconvenient, and asks if there is truly no other option. The shopkeeper quickly suggests that a custom order would be possible, as long as Kettle is willing to wait. Kettle immediately brightens and says he would love that. The tailor nervously agrees and promises to contact him when the clothing is ready, all while silently wondering whether he will survive the encounter if the barbarian ends up disliking the final product. Later, on his way to the mercenary guild, Kettle notices something glittering on the ground. He crouches down and picks it up. It is a small, smooth bead. Turning it over in his fingers, he wonders why a gemstone would be lying in the street. Then it begins to glow faintly in his hand. Intrigued, he decides to ask Rosa about it. At the guild, he shows her the orb and explains that he found it on the way there. Rosa studies it for a moment, then says it is clearly no ordinary gem. Kettle agrees. She points out that it does not even seem like a natural gemstone. The surface is too smooth, too deliberate, clearly crafted by someone, and yet it has no markings or inscriptions at all. As she keeps staring at it, her eyes start to glaze over. She mutters to herself, wondering if the orb might hold some kind of value. Kettle snaps his fingers, and she jolts back to her senses. He asks if she is all right. Rosa looks confused and says she does not know what he means. Kettle tells her that she looked as though she had been entranced by the orb. She blinks, trying to piece things together, then admits that he might be right. There is definitely something strange about its energy, she says. She offers to have it appraised. Kettle declines, saying that figuring it out himself is part of the fun. Then he asks what requests are available. Rosa, still trying to regain her composure, grabs the request sheet and hands it over. The list reads street cleaning, sewer cleaning, weed pulling, and potato digging. Kettle looks thrilled. That night, his reward pouch sits neatly on the nightstand beside his bed. Kettle reflects on the day and says it was another satisfying one. Even so, the orb still lingers in his thoughts. Rosa's reaction was not normal, and he cannot help wondering what kind of power it might contain. Then suddenly a voice echoes inside his head telling him to come. He freezes, unsure whether he really heard it. The voice repeats itself, whispering for him to follow. Kettle furrows his brow and wonders where exactly it is trying to lead him. Then he realizes it is showing him something. A map inside his mind. He keeps listening, thinking it over. Then he peers out the window and decides that there is probably no harm in checking it out. But as the voice continues echoing through his thoughts, he finally snaps at it and tells it to shut up. And soon he finally arrived, Kettle stopping in front of a dark cave. He looks up at the entrance, smiles slightly, and asks if this is the place. Deep inside, a skeleton's eyes glow in the darkness. The voice continues. Kettle announces that he has arrived and asks where the body behind the voice is. Then from the shadows, a sinister voice answers him. It mocks Kettle as just another fool who walked right into its lair. Just another sacrifice, though this one is bigger than the others. The creature declares that this makes 10. And now, with that many, resurrection may finally be possible. The truth is, long ago, during the Age of Great Wars, a powerful and malevolent mage manipulated the minds of kings and drove entire nations into conflict. He twisted the emotions of rulers, stirred chaos wherever he went, and claimed dominion over the crumbling remnants left behind. But eventually, his atrocities caught up with him. Heroes rose against him and nearly brought him to an end. Before he could be destroyed, however, the mage transferred his soul into a vessel and became a lich. Undying now and bound to his phylactery, he began plotting his return. To restore his strength, he needed living sacrifices, so he settled near a forgotten region and planted enchanted orbs to lure in the ignorant. His goal was simple: gather enough lives, reconstruct his body, and rise again to conquer the world once more. He chose this region because of its isolation. Few people passed through it, which made it perfect for secrecy. But the appearance of a barbarian, especially one from the White Wasteland, was highly unusual. The lich watches Kettle with amusement. He notes that the orb's enchantment only affects those who are ignorant of the mystic. That means Kettle must lack any awareness of it, making him just another pawn to fuel the lich's rebirth. He dismisses the barbarian as one more soul for the fire. Meanwhile, Kettle arrives before a large set of doors and assumes that this must be the place. He steps through and finds himself face to face with the lich, who stands ready to consume him. Kettle stares with wide eyes and asks out loud if this is really a lich. The title alone sounds ridiculous to him. He recalls that liches are the stuff of legend, mages who reach the peak of magic and cast aside mortality itself. They are the quintessential villain of every epic fantasy tale, and now there is one standing right in front of him. The lich sneers and asks what this barbarian is even doing there. Was he not supposed to fall under the orb's influence? Kettle lets out a laugh, realizing that this is how all the sacrifices were lured in. The lich admits that he sensed no mystic from him at all. Kettle was supposed to be an ordinary fool. But now, the lich suspects that the barbarian must possess some kind of mental protection artifact, a powerful one capable of resisting the orb's enchantment. He cannot imagine how a barbarian got his hands on such an item. But luck must have favored him. Kettle says he has no such artifact. The lich scoffs and accuses him of lying. He says that if Kettle had simply succumbed quietly, he could have died painlessly. But now, the barbarian will have to be crushed the hard way. With that, he summons his undead servants. As the skeletons charge forward, Kettle grins and says that stumbling into a dungeon with a real lich might be the best encounter he has had yet. The first skeleton leaps at him, and Kettle casually smashes its skull with a single swing, reducing it to powder. The lich watches in disbelief. Kettle remarks that the skeletons are flimsy, far weaker than he expected. The lich scowls and threatens to tear off his limbs, while keeping him alive just long enough for the ritual. Then he summons a dozen more skeletons, and orders them to cut Kettle down. Kettle sighs and cracks his knuckles. As they rush him, he knocks one into the air, smashes another into the ground, slams a third away with a high kick, and bulldozes through the rest with nothing but brute force. The lich is left frozen and speechless. Kettle casually notes that, just as Kassan once told him, destroying the head works perfectly fine. But even so, for Lich he is disappointed. There is no Death Knight, no necrotic horror. Not even a summoned abomination, just skeletons. That word alone lands a critical hit on the Lich's pride. So the Lich, Cardos, seethes with frustration and mutters that he has had enough of playing nice. His staff begins to radiate with a fierce, unnatural glow, and the cavern trembles as he calls forth something stronger, something meant to put an end to this nonsense. In the next instant, a heavily armored skeleton knight emerges, summoned by Cardos himself. Kettle's eyes widen slightly in recognition. He says that it has been a while since he last saw one of those, but considering it was conjured by a Lich, it might actually be a bit more dangerous and interesting. Cardos stretches out his bony hand toward the knight and commands it to kill. The undead champion surges forward without hesitation, sword drawn, its eyes glowing with magical fire. Kettle tightens his stance and mutters that a skeleton knight forged by a Lich should be different, stronger. As the knight closes in, it raises its weapon for a cleaving strike. Kettle moves first. He drives his fist straight into its torso. The blow sends the skeleton knight crashing into the far wall with such force that its armor explodes into shards on impact. Dust clouds swirl through the chamber and from the rubble. The skeleton knight slowly drags itself back into view. But now crawling, Kettle watches and admits that this one is tougher than the others. The Lich, seeing that his minion is damaged but still functioning, unleashes the knight's full mana reserves. Mystic power erupts around it, and the skeleton knight launches itself forward once again, now faster and deadlier than before. Kettle stands his ground. As the knight charges, he narrows his eyes and, clearly unimpressed, comments that this is a little underwhelming for something created by a Lich. Then he steps into the attack and smashes the knight in the head, sending it flying backward once again. In another thunderous explosion, Cardos waits, staring into the dust for any sign of movement. But this time the knight does not rise. Kettle casually steps on its outstretched hand and says that while it was unusual, it was nothing all that special in the end. Then he looks at the Lich and asks if that was really all he had. Cardos stares at him in stunned silence. He says that he still senses no mystic from Kettle, no magical signature, no protective artifact, not even the slightest trace of residual mana, which means Kettle defeated a fully enhanced skeleton knight using nothing but pure physical strength. The Lich admits that he does not even know whether such a thing should be possible, then reluctantly concedes that Kettle must be something entirely different. Then, with chilling resolve, Cardos raises his staff and declares that he will handle this personally. The cavern begins to darken. Shadows press inward, until only the red glow of Cardos' eyes remains visible. Kettle, thrilled by the sudden shift in atmosphere, smiles and asks if this means the real fight is finally starting. The Lich says that Kettle will pay the price for trespassing in his sanctum. Kettle shrugs and remarks that he only came because the orb led him there, so he assumes Cardos was the one behind it. The Lich confirms it. The orbs were his traps scattered throughout the land to lure sacrifices into his grasp. Kettle, just like the others, had simply taken the bait. Cardos lifts his staff even higher and grandly proclaims his title. He calls himself the mighty sorcerer who toppled 5 kingdoms, battled legendary heroes, and ruled through terror. Then he announces his full name, Cardos Branilis Kesses. Kettle blinks, completely unimpressed, and wonders out loud why everyone in this world has such long, dramatic names. Ignoring the remark, Cardos begins casting his signature spell. The air twists as a strange energy pours from his staff and rushes toward Kettle. This is no ordinary attack. It is a psychological curse, a spell designed to manipulate the deepest emotions of its victim. It drags their inner darkness to the surface, traps them inside it, and leaves them mentally paralyzed. It is Cardos' signature move, perfected over centuries. It consumes almost no mana, yet breaks nearly every mind it touches. Cardos laughs and says that a barbarian with no mystic resistance has no chance against it. He plans to capture Kettle afterward and study him. The skeleton guards begin rising once again, and Cardos orders them to seize the barbarian. But as the skeletons advance, Kettle steps forward with perfectly clear eyes. Without the slightest hesitation, he kicks one of the skeletons into the air and shatters it into dust. Cardos stares in horror as another explosion shakes the room. He mutters that the spell should have worked flawlessly. Kettle turns toward him and asks if he seriously thought he could trap him with a trick that weak. Then he asks if Cardos is really planning to send more skeletons at him again. He says it is honestly starting to get boring. Cardos, growing desperate, insists that humans are ruled by emotion. Even the strongest among them are haunted by some kind of inner darkness. This barbarian should not be immune, and yet he is. Kettle then asks if he knows how to cast something more exciting, like a fireball. The Lich bristles with rage. He declares that comparing his spells to basic magic is an insult. But if that is what Kettle wants, then he will give him something far greater. Cardos begins a deep incantation, summoning a dark entity within a glowing orb. He says that this spell will drown the world in chaos and shatter clarity itself. Kettle watches with open admiration as the spell takes form. Then Cardos releases it. The energy roars forward and completely engulfs Kettle. The Lich throws his head back and howls in triumph, but then his knees suddenly give out. He collapses and coughs violently, spewing black ichor. He mutters that he poured everything into that spell, his entire mana pool, leaving only the bare minimum needed to maintain his physical form. Even so, he says it was worth it. The barbarian has to be finished now. Then Kettle's voice cuts through the silence. He says the spell was impressive and asks if that was all. Cardos looks up with wide, horrified eyes as Kettle walks out completely unharmed. Kettle says that he did not really feel anything from the attack, and if that was Cardos' grand finale, then maybe it is his turn now. With casual confidence, he lifts his axe onto his shoulder. Cardos begins laughing maniacally. He says that now it is obvious. Kettle must have known who he was from the very beginning. The Empire must have sent him. Only they would go to such lengths to hunt him down. He even praises their intelligence network for finding him so quickly, but swears that he will rise again and rule once more. He says he has heard the rumors. Deep within the Empire lies a human breeding ground, a facility that produces elite warriors, each one forged for a specific purpose. Kettle must be one of them, an assassin blade created for the sole purpose of killing him. Cardos shrieks that even so, he will defy fate. He will destroy the Empire, burn its armies, and reclaim his throne of darkness. Meanwhile, Kettle gives out a look of actual concern. Then the final act begins. Cardos summons a spiritual artifact, a ghostly urn. It glows ominously as he hurls it at Kettle, revealing that it is, in fact, his own soul. Cardos intends to possess Kettle's body and devour his mind from within. Without becoming a lich again, this would trap him permanently inside Kettle's form, but he has no other options left. He flies into Kettle, declaring that the barbarian's body now belongs to him. Kettle hesitates for just a brief moment, then everything goes still. Cardos' soul has entered. The possession begins, but something is wrong. Something feels off, and deep inside Kettle's mind, Cardos is about to learn just how catastrophic a mistake he has made. Cardos, now inside the barbarian's inner world, stumbles in confusion. He mutters that he has never seen anything like this. Everything is warped, disjointed, hostile, unnatural. The very act of perceiving Kettle's inner world begins to fracture Cardos' consciousness. He insists that this cannot be something crafted by the Empire. This is beyond them. Panic sets in as his thoughts unravel. His mind begins to splinter under the overwhelming pressure, and he cries out in disbelief, stammering incoherently before collapsing into nothingness. His final words amount to a confused, defeated "huh." Kettle watches Cardos' body slump to the ground, raises a brow, and says he has no idea what just happened. The lich seemed to cast something on himself and then completely fall apart. That swirling black magic looked cool for a moment, but beyond that it was underwhelming. He remarks that if liches are supposed to be the pinnacle of magic, then this one certainly did not live up to the hype. Still, the dungeon is cleared, so now it is time to claim his reward. He picks up Cardos' staff. Noting how brightly it glowed during spellcasting, he wonders if it helps with magic, and whether that means he might be able to try casting spells too. Then he notices a glowing crystal and pockets it, figuring it is probably valuable. As he looks around, he also picks up the strange urn that had been tied to Cardos. Judging by how important it seemed and by Cardos' obsession with it, Kettle figures it might be a phylactery. He decides that he will ask Rosa to appraise it later. With that, he starts gathering up the rest of the loot, but something suddenly feels off. His eyes sweep across the cave and stop on a suspicious patch of wall. Curious, he walks over and pokes at it. The wall immediately crumbles, revealing a hidden passage. He steps through. Inside, the air turns colder. Dozens of people line the walls of the hidden chamber, motionless, silent, their eyes vacant. Kettle blinks, caught off guard. He mutters that this must have been a sacrificial chamber. He walks past the lifeless figures, waving a hand in front of their faces, even leaning in close to check for some kind of reaction, but there is nothing. He sighs and decides it is best to report this. There is nothing more he can do here, so he leaves the dungeon and heads straight to the guild. When he arrives at the guild hall, Rosa greets him with a bright smile, surprised to see him back so early. Kettle says he had a few things to take care of. She asks what kind of things, and Kettle reminds her of the orb he showed her the day before tea. Hen immediately launches into the full story. Rosa laughs at first, clearly thinking he is joking, a lich out here, but Kettle insists it is true. Then he pulls out the urn, says it might be the life vessel, and asks her to appraise it. Rosa stares at the artifact for a moment, then she recoils in shock. Her voice trembles as she realizes he is not joking at all.